Good evening and welcome to another Pharaoh Art Stream with myself, Pharaoh, and my first time and special guest, Simon Roberts.
Breaking my cherry on the Pharaoh channel. Good evening, Pharaoh. and thank you for inviting me on, and indeed for bringing me out to the theatre once again at a star-studded night in London's glittering West End, or not West End, off West End.
Yes, exactly. Well, just a bit of background to this. Off the back of the theatre discussion we had the other day, I'm kind of interested with the idea of trying to come up with like a bit of a guide for those who are interested into like good quality theatre and the like, basically. And so as part of that, I tried to get a group of people to come down to the Royal Court with me to see this play, and Simon was one of the few that got back to me.
Literally the only one.
Literally the only one. I didn't want it to sound quite as desperate and sad as that, Simon, but
it's all right. They're just Philistines. What can we say? They missed out. We got new writing. Yeah,
exactly. What I do every year is to do a full analysis, because again, it's just I'm just a little bit special. A full analysis of all of the shows that are on every single year at all of the major theatre places, and then try and identify maybe like 4 or 5 that are worth seeing, because often they'll advance stuff way in advance, and they'll give you a couple of months before you can buy tickets. And so this year's season has been particularly bad in terms of general wokery, dare I use that word, with even some of, because again, you can always rely on some of the classics. You'll have like a Shakespeare, you'll have an Ibsen, you'll have a Chekhov, but there is a tendency more and more nowadays to do pretty horrendous adaptations of said plays. So even the kind of classics are increasingly less and less worth going to. Now, what's interesting for me about the Royal Court is that they often big up themselves as a place of new writing, and as Simon kind of pointed out, we would consider them to be the fringe. I mean, is it worth just chatting about different theatres a second and explaining for those who...
I mean, it wouldn't really be the fringe in London theatre. I mean, the fringe are all the kinds of unsubsidised theatres, the little rooms over pubs, or, the repurposed buildings, the site-specific things of warehouses that have been turned into venues for shows. And the Royal Court is one of those independent theatres. It's not one of the the two biggie subsidised, the Royal Shakespeare Company and the National, and it's not the sort of commercial West End, but it's an outlier off the West End that, as you say, has hosted new writing and has got a sort of glittering history of new writing. Most famously being associated with people like John Osborne, Look Back in Anger, The Entertainer. I think Joe Orton may have been there at some point. All sorts of people, Edward Bond, and in more recent years, the sort of the enfant terrible of modern British theatre. People like Sarah Kane and Jez Butterworth and Carol Churchill, who interestingly is the hero doyenne for our playwright this evening. Actually, she's one of
really. I hate Churchill with a loathing vengeance.
Have you seen Churchill like Top Girls or something like that?
No.
Or one of our other plays.
Yeah. I was. She did this kind of like short. I'd say it was like half an hour long, but it was all about a guy being like dressed and undressed by a healthcare worker or something like that, and it was okay. They repeated the same scene for 40 minutes.
Yeah,
and it was literally the most painful thing I've ever seen. And it was £15, and like that. I mean, that's pretty good price for a theatre ticket. And I felt brutalized. I felt robbed and stolen.
You never get that back, I'm afraid. That time, all that money, all that dignity. I think actually, which you lose a lot of when you watch this kind of arduous, preachy theatre. Is what it sounds like it is.
Yeah, and of course, just my perspective on the theatre scene in London. You've got obviously got the West End, which is kind of like big ticket prices, big names, a lot of musicals, and you kind of people from across the country will come down for the day to see a show. Basically, they've got that much kind of magnitude. And then, like Simon mentioned, you've got these kind of large peripheral of smaller venues. But the Royal Court's got a very strong name, and again, everything's a little bit hit or miss. Now, I guess one of the reasons why I wanted to do the review today is because I wasn't sure what we were going to see coming into it. It was advertised as one thing, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I thought it was kind of interesting and pertinent to our sphere in general. Worthwhile chatting about. But do you want to do any other kind of preamble before we get into the play itself? Yeah,
I actually made like pages and pages of notes, which I don't know if I'm going to be able to crowbar all of them in, but there is. I think that there's lots of interesting things about the play. Now, I think we one of the taglines they actually used on the advertising outside the theatre, I don't know if you noticed, it was "You won't see the beginning coming." Reversal of you won't see the end coming and stuff. But I mean, maybe in a way we could start at the beginning briefly, because I mean we both sort of had sort of instant reactions when we came out. And they may have changed over time, as we've sort of, settled and thought about the play a bit. I mean, I was initially sort of mere skeptical, very interesting to sit and watch some new writing and then to think about it and analyze it later. I think you saw some more positives in it at that stage, when we'd come out.
Yeah, no, I mean, I thought the whole thing was a cipher. It was like a crypto right-wing play. And I'd like to say I have rolled back that opinion slightly, but again, I think there are some interesting things and some discussion points. Just before we continue, just want to say big spoiler warning. If you want to see the show, I would definitely recommend maybe not listening tonight and just going to it because there are some quite big spoiler warnings. But for those who just want to kind of listen and vicariously enjoy the theatre, please listen on. So, Simon, we entered the space. I mean, what were your initial thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's something, as I said to you, I'd never been to the Royal Court before, because it's such a prestigious space to go into. And of course, like most things in life, when you come up against it in reality, you go, oh, is it only really that big? And is it that sort of slightly shabby looking as well? It's a sort of scaled down version of a West End theatre, really, kind of sort of dark and slightly cavernous. And it had been self-consciously very, very stripped back for the format and the design of this play. And I was struck by the framing of the play itself, because it starts to sort of, as you said, we're hinting at spoilers, but the thing really kind of turns itself inside out from the beginning, doesn't it? It sort of it does literally kind of give you the ending within the first preamble, which is a projection onto a black screen, which creates a sort of air of intrigue. And we could talk about that framing perhaps. It's that the play we went to see was titled "That Is Not Who I Am" by Dave Davidson, and as you go in to the theatre, the house lights go down, and a projection and a voiceover comes up, explaining that you're there under a false impression. In fact, you're going to see another play. And this particular play is to do with this intrigue about a couple called the Quilters. Should we go into that and the sort of the sort of framing from there?
Yeah, just one thing I wanted to say is that the screen was there at the start, but it had kind of static on it, I remember. And just one thing to say, obviously the original billing was called that is not who I am, and it was kind of pitched as like, here's the notes from the back here. When Ollie had his identity stolen on the internet, it's bad enough, but soon it's not just his life collapsing, but his real life is being stolen too. So it's pitched as this kind of online privacy, digital identity theft thing. Yeah. So it's already got these kind of themes of privacy, digital, etc. But you have this kind of big twist right at the beginning where the kind of screen reveals that it's not the play. But last thing I'll say before, if maybe Simon, I don't know if you want to read out the introduction, but the kind of use of video equipment has been something very popular in the theatre world for the last 30 years. A lot of kind of award-winning productions will use live video recordings or projection as part of their plays, wouldn't they? So
and often incredibly creatively and texturally, brilliant and even sublime in some cases. And this is actually kind of pretty dry because it's setting up the framing of technology with, we see a projection of CCTV images, don't we, as we're seated waiting for the lights to go down, and these are kind of on a repeat, grainy images, commonplaces to us now. So you get the impression we're going to be talking a play about the theme of digital surveillance. And so they have this projection and voiceover that comes up before the play, which I'll read from the play text which we picked up on the evening. The Royal Court Theatre would like to apologise that the play you're about to see is different to the one advertised for reasons which will become clear. The real title of this play is Rapture. And it goes on to tell us it's the story of Noah and Celeste Quilter. And it's a kind of framing device where you have the theatre itself saying we're going to reveal this dangerous and controversial truth, and we've kind of lured you in under false pretenses, but we're going to sort of bravely expose this story. That the introduction itself goes on to say that even the Home Office has forbidden us to talk about, and we tonight are going to kind of sort of break the conventions and break the fourth wall and draw you into this kind of conspiratorial atmosphere. And
another key line from there, I think, is this one: following the recent move of the Home Secretary to block the publication of the report into the Quilters' deaths, playwright Lucy Kirkwood was asked by a campaign group to produce a dramatisation of their relationship. So, Simon mentions the kind of foreshadowing right from the start, but again, you've got this kind of conspiratorial, clandestine element to it right from the very start. Now, what was your initial reaction to seeing this kind of big voiceover?
To be honest, I mean, because I'm so ever so terribly old and experienced with these things, I think it struck me as a bit hokum actually at the beginning, because it was very much like I feel it reminded me of this the book of by Umberto Eco, The Name of the Rose.
Yes,
I don't know if you're familiar with it. Sort of medieval murder mystery set in a monastery, made into a film with Sean Connery. Yeah. And he uses a very interesting device at the beginning of the book, and I guess it's one that's probably been echoed, over the centuries of literature, where he describes discovering a transcription of a medieval manuscript which relates this sort of thrilling story set in a monastery where monks are dying mysteriously, and it's set in like night. He starts this introduction sort of he's there sort of just escaping the Czech. The invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1968 or whatever it was, and he's got hold of this copy of this book with this manuscript from the Middle Ages with this intriguing story, and then he sort of escapes through Europe and sails up the Danube, sort of gets away with this, and then he loses the book, and then he has to kind of try and take his notes and then turn them into the novel. So it's a kind of long way of saying I found a secret manuscript that nobody else had, and then it disappeared, and now I'm giving you the story which I took the notes from it, and it's a kind of MacGuffin in a way. It's
done many times. Just think off the top of my head, Cervantes used it as well for Don Quixote. So it's a very old trope,
Yeah. I mean, I think in the definition, I looked up, just to be sure, the definition of a MacGuffin. It's often something that it's kind of an artifact or an event or something in the story that in itself is not intrinsically important, and that kind of falls away. But what it reveals about the characters is what's useful. And I think, if anything, the way this is framed, the MacGuffin is kind of truth itself in this play. That they're teasing you with the idea that there's this contested narrative, but they're bravely bringing bringing you, the truth that they've pieced together in the form of the playwright or someone playing the playwright. So it's very meta already at the beginning, and outlining, how you're going to be sort of drawn into this, what essentially they say is a reconstruction of what's going on. So there's always a little bit of slippage already between reality and performance that they've engineered into this. So you start off with these two characters.
Can I just say that?
Go ahead.
Just from my perspective, my instant reaction was total despair, because I had literally searched across all these different plays to find the one like mildly interesting online related, topical play,
yes,
written by a non. It hadn't been diversified or whatever. And as soon as they said that, I instantly thought that this was like a real case, but it was all to do with like the police shooting someone, shooting a certain segment of the population, let's just say. And then we're just in there for an hour and a half of just like woke preaching about how bad society is, basically. So I was instantly saddened, but luckily that was not the case, as you can maybe carry on. So
yeah. I mean, as you say, I mean, it's either that or it kind of hints at the conspiracies around the death of people like Dr. David Kelly. It's sort of had sort of strong echoes of that kind of thing. So you've got many sort of blurrings of reality and narrative already sort of taking place. And then you're kind of you're drawn straight into this sort of first key scene where we're sort of looking at a stage where it's completely black, and then the lights come up, and you've got a floating room essentially where two young people are on a date. It's a blind date that's been set up through a newspaper, something like what The Guardian used to do apparently. And it's our two characters. It's Noah and Celeste. They're sort of in this kind of charming to and fro of flirting with each other over this dinner. You could sort of say some things about the design at this stage, I think, which would be interesting, because you've got them sort of in this suspended room, and it's very stripped back. It's like stud walls and kind of like like a Japanese style paper walls in a wooden framed room, and they're sitting at a very plain table, just sort of talking to each other. And there's a great sort of sexual tension in the air as they sort of ask questions of each other and try to sort of wind each other up a little bit, and they flirt and tease. And you're drawn into this conversation they have where it enters conspiracy theories.
Yeah. Even just before that, the first thing I noticed was I think both Noah and Celeste, in some ways, are these kind of archetypical everyman style characters. I don't know if you know this, but Noah is the number one baby name right now.
Right.
It's
Hebrew for the word rest, apparently.
Oh, there we go. Interesting as well.
Yeah.
But I almost imagined it as her choosing it as like a John Bull or John Smith character, and again Celeste has that kind of like working class feel to it. And again, they've got kind of both like Essex accents, talking about things like football, and the conversation starts out quite benign in many ways, just like a normal dinner table conversation between two normal people, like you said, a bit of flirting, until again there's a turn in the conversation.
Yeah, that's right. And just interesting, I looked up the meanings of the names as well for her. Her name's Celeste Greer. Celeste is Latin for heavenly, and Greer apparently is an old Scottish word which means watchful. So heavenly watchful. I mean, and that's a big, fat, heavy hammer of a clue that bangs you over the head later in the play. So they start to have this conversation, and it gets into, at first, sort of slightly winding each other up about conspiracy theories. So on the one hand, she brings up chemtrails, doesn't she? And he brings up 9/11, and they're both sort of mildly disbelieving of each other, but at the same time intrigued. And the sort of scene unfolds with them sort of. She's kind of playing out her insecurity, and he's playing out his kind of reluctance to expose himself by sort of being sort of gameful and teasing, and and you go through the scene, and you sort of see these people sort of edging closer together, breaking off occasionally to talk to the audience and tell you how much they're in that kind of Romeo and Juliet moment of the first flush of young love kind of thing.
They actually named the section, didn't they? Like first flush as well.
The first flush, yes.
It comes up on there.
Yeah.
One thing I did want to say is that there's so basically Celeste brings up the chemtrails, and then Noah brings up the 9/11, and again it kind of both shows their kind of archetypal personalities. I absolutely laughed out loud at Noah because he literally did the meme. He did the meme live. I have to here's his exact lines, quote, because otherwise you'd have to believe that a bit of burning jet fuel alone is enough to melt 8 steel pillars at exactly the same moment, which is like fine, but it just seems way more rational to me.
Yeah.
Anyway, he goes on and on. But
I mean, did you find as I did? I mean, I simply really, to be honest, I really didn't believe, certainly her, I didn't believe that she would have any interest in conspiratorial themes at all. I mean, she seems kind of sassy and urban,
I think that's an interesting point, just from my kind of limited interactions with various groups. I think that women tend to interact with more health-related matters, if that makes sense. So, for example, vax stuff or stuff around kids. So again, like something like chemtrails
would play to that anxiety, I guess.
Well, I don't think so. I think it's more of like a mannish conspiracy in some ways. And again, it's interesting because again, this was set in the past as well, wasn't it? I was trying to remember the
2010, yeah,
2010. So, this is still kind of believable that they bring it up, but I mean, it struck me already that this was I don't know, an unlikely conversation, if that makes sense. Like who did people 10 years ago bring this kind of stuff up in polite society? I don't think so.
No.
But again, maybe there's some points to that in a second. But do you want to carry on?
Yeah, I mean, and of course, I say that because, I mean, they are it seems very consciously framed as your modern urban couple, and we all know from watching plenty of adverts what that means. It's the Benetton casting that we've got. So she's mixed race, black, and he's white, and everything's got a kind of very loose and sort of funky vibe. And there's a sort of, there's a sense in which these are kind of fungible people, aren't they? They're sort of interchangeable. I mean, you even sort of see this later on with some elements of the design, which we can talk about in their flat. But there's it's kind of all surface tension. There's nothing terribly deep and meaningful revealed at this point. You just get this impression of there's a sort of slightly sexy atmosphere, young love, and they're going to kind of the flirting sort of kind of reaches a peak, and then they kind of have to sort of break out of the scene. And the interesting thing, the way they do that, of course, is to kind of contrive to sort of steal away from the restaurant, and they kind of literally break through the wall at the back of the room and disappear.
Sorry to keep rolling back. One thing before that happens that I think is an interesting, and again sets us up for ideas of the false narrator, is that Celeste asks Noah about his school, and basically Noah goes on about this long this long story about how he as a working class person was recruited by Princess Diana to be a working class companion for William and Harry, and he describes it as saying, we'd play Mortal Kombat or Civilization 2 and tune their radios to Capital FM, and make prank phone calls, or take them to Quasar, or go up in town or watch the buskers in Covent Garden with a 2-litre bottle of White Lightning. But then he basically turns around and then says it's all a big joke. So it was all just messing around. So again, you get an idea a little bit of Noah's character. But interestingly, I don't know. I was quite bought in. Again, obviously he's a good actor, but you sort of believe what Noah's saying. You believe it could potentially be true, and then it's all revealed not to be as well. So again, these ideas of truths and lies, already you're sort of questioning them.
Yeah, and even though they're obviously millennials, they're not sort of playing with kind of Gen X type being ironic in all of that. There is just that element of people are looking to see how suggestible other people are in their kind of their social banter, the art of winding people up, the art of teasing, you know, not taking anything too seriously. And I think this is something which echoes, you know, from the end of the play back, when you begin to realize that there's a sort of there is a theme of people sort of not having a kind of seriousness in the underpinning of their life.
Yeah. So talk to me about the end of the scene.
Yeah. So they decide that that the kind of you know, they've kind of flirted to the point now where it's kind of obvious, you know, they're going to get it on, and they literally decide to kind of sort of, you know, at that point, you know, not pay for the meal. They're going to run out, and they charge through the wall of the room that they're in, this paper wall, and it's quite a striking moment, because we never go back to that room. And that room is left sort of suspended above the set, and is referred to throughout. And there's an enormous rent in the wall, and through the rent in the wall, you just, you know, at first to start with, you just see blackness. But sometimes through it, you can see there's an exit sign at the back of the back of the theatre. It was a consciously placed green exit sign that was on throughout the play. And you also see that room kind of recur as a sort of, you know, a memory of something they've lost. And the room is also used as a screen for projecting on, which we see later, and used in quite interesting ways to sort of suggest the kind of the rent in their lives, the kind of the increasing sort of disconnection between them in a way.
Yeah, just one thing to add to that was one of Noah's justifications for bailing on the not paying for their food was complaining about the waiter. And again, quote, this is a great line. He's had nothing but contempt from us from the moment he walked in. He rolled his eyes at how you pronounce Chipotle. He's the walking embodiment of why controlled immigration is actually not a bad idea. Now, at that line, there was a visible cries from the audience, which literally made me laugh. I don't know if you heard that, Simon. There's like 2 or 3 middle-aged, intelligentsia almost had a heart attack. But even those words were spoken in such a sacred and hallowed ground.
There was a kind of sort of weird little bit of frisson, wasn't there? You know, and you got the sense they'd established him as a kind of, you know, a kind of streetwise sort of urban character. He'd been in the army. You know, he joked about being injured in the Middle East, you know, having his knob shot off or something like that, you know, and that gets a bit of a laugh. And so he's a bit of a lad, basically, to us. So he can kind of express that, and it's a little bit of antagonism to the audience, but you get the sense that, you know, she's going to kind of straighten this guy out in some way. You know, they're going to sort of across the cultural divide in some way. They're going to you know, get together, and she's going to sort of soften out his kind of sort of slightly cagey kind of persona, and he's going to kind of bring her out of herself.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
yeah, and so after basically the little mini scene ends, someone steps out onto the stage, and it's an actor playing the writer of the play. Do you want to talk about what she got?
Yeah. So you have. Yeah, we're told, of course, as I said, the play is written by Dave Davidson. That's the framing that's used. And then we're told, actually, the play is a different play, and it's presumably not written by Dave Davidson. And here's somebody playing a character called Lucy Kirkwood, who is the playwright. And it's not actually Lucy Kirkwood on the stage. It's someone playing Lucy Kirkwood at well, what we discover is 2 removes later on in the play. And she is a kind of you know, she's become a kind of researcher who she's pieced together this story, which, you know, we're seeing played out in flashback, and she's managed to sort of coalesce a lot of this stuff by, you know, researching online and pulling together the details of the story the representation of what you've seen versus what she's found out, and she's explaining the sort of the holes in the story and the way the circumstantial evidence doesn't quite match up to the official story. And so you're beginning to get drawn into this idea that there's some sort of conscious intrigue, some sort of some sort of targeting that's gone on this seemingly innocent couple at this stage, and she's there to kind of sort of stand at the side of the stage, occasionally intervene and talk to the audience and say, well, it wasn't quite like this, it was like that, or I went in and I found this detail that actually this is what happened, and then she sort of links everything together. She's kind of voiceover.
Yeah, and just to add more of that kind of unreliable narrator. I mean, she's literally the unreliable narrator. She kind of points out that most of her friends, she interviewed friends of the couple, and they say they actually paid for their meal, and how this was just kind of like a formation story for their relationship. So again, this idea that even that little scene was that last part of the scene was rubbish, and just a point in terms of where she's kind of pulled the information. She mentions the scene you just witnessed was a reconstruction from these records, from interviews with friends, and from a transcription of the CCTV by an expert lip reader. So again, you got this idea of how technology is, unconsciously recording all different parts of our lives in a way never seen before. And could we? One question I was constantly thinking was, could you have done this in any other age? And the answer is no. It's only in our modern age where everything's recorded that we could actually rebuild the lives of people from just fragments of information.
Yes, yeah, and it's very much a lot of the staging. It consciously sort of summons up sort of things like Crime Watch in a way that everything is. On the one hand, you trust that it's kind of you're seeing the characters actually as they are, if you like, in this kind of fictional reality of the play. But you're actually seeing the people as they are. But actually, you're being told as well that these are actors playing these parts. And you're not. It's not like a film where you suspend your disbelief and you identify with the person on the screen as being the character in the story. They're already at one other remove, and yet the way it's played, it's very emotionally rooted and very kind of sort of passionate and kind of funny and kind of earthy in a way, so that you do get kind of drawn into that sense of, well, I feel I'm kind of I'm sort of wanting to follow and believe this, like I'd be watching a soap opera.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So on to the next scene, and I will only describe this as they cut to the couple having a sexual encounter. Now, what's your thoughts about sex on the stage?
Grim. Yeah. I don't want it to be perfectly honest. I mean, I'm long past the time where this kind of stuff gets me worked up at all. I noticed actually one of the interesting things about this production, if you go and look into it, is they had a special intimacy coordinator, and again, this is one of those things in the kind of post Me Too era that has become like a whole new area of performance specialization that's opened up, and a lady called Yarit Dor, who is the intimacy coordinator for this show. And if you go and have a look online and do a search for her, you find some quite interesting sort of areas of this new discipline, sort of guidelines for performers on doing sort of sex on stage and stuff. And it's interesting because it's always this thing of the kind of the progressive left always wants to kind of come in and reform things and sort of set up a kind of an industrialized and systematized approach in which it invests everything with a kind of professional and technical expertise, while smuggling in all these kinds of assumptions about the intentions behind performance. And in the past, actors, they just did this stuff and kind of rolled with the punches, so to speak. But now it's become this sense in which the performance is highly organized in respect of these things, which are made to seem like spontaneous life, but which are very, very controlled. And I was going down a bit of a rabbit hole looking into this intimacy coordination stuff, because there was these sort of guidelines for performers, and it's all this sort of stuff about constantly asking people, are they okay when they're rehearsing? And they've got to be rehearsed in specific ways. And, you've got to kind of wear special padding so that, nobody rubs anybody up the way that makes them sort of too excited. And there's special garments they have to wear as barriers and all this sort of thing. And it's kind of what I'm sort of getting towards is it's investing the whole the art of making performance and theatre with the expertise of practitioners who kind of are basically trading on a sort of anticipation of some kind of trauma from representing life on stage. Now there's a certain amount of because she also does movement coordination, this lady, as well. And that's another area I'm sort of vaguely familiar with in theatre. And it's like things like people who are fight directors, so you get professionals who come in and they choreograph fights and they show you the techniques to do it safely. I mean, I did a fight certificate. So you sort of have all these tricks and techniques to convincingly deploy violence on the stage.
You've heard it here first. Don't mess with Simon. He will deploy his certificate.
I was rubbish at it. I was absolutely rubbish at it. But it was it's very interesting because, I mean, the thing is I had a sort of a different parallel life working with people in the police and the special forces in the defense industry for a while. So I used to talk to people who dealt in real violence, and I was always I'm interested in sort of crossover of the phenomena of real violence and performative violence. And of course, the stuff on stage just isn't quite like real violence. You know what I mean? There's a sort of a failure built into it in a similar way to I'm sort of seeing with this intimacy coordination stuff, where you have these very self-conscious. As you say, the sex scene, it's kind of cringy and it's self-conscious and it's kind of doing that thing of, I mean, this is a play about surveillance to an extent, and it's doing that thing of drawing you into that prurient space of getting, I guess, emotionally involved or, how can you put it? It's not. I mean, the sex isn't sexy. It wasn't like sexy or anything, sort of arousing or anything like that.
But it's embarrassment in my chair.
It's the way it's kind of used in performance. I think it's kind of it's a thing in drama. I mean, I don't. My main thing in drama is Shakespeare, and of course, there's not many sex scenes in Shakespeare. There aren't really any. And it's like it's the thing of leave it off stage. Not for any kind of prudishness, but it's just kind of non-contributory, as you often would say. I mean, people can try and justify this in drama and say, well, it tells you something about them, it says something about the story. But I think it's very rare that really sex scenes actually tell you something about the characters of the story. I mean, it could be, yes, you could be doing a story about infidelity or things that are particular, but this just kind of seems like it's another kind of gratuitous. It's a kind of, I don't know, that's where it is for me. It's not something I find necessary, but it's kind of uncomfortable because it's kind of temporizing the action in some way. It's blocking something and getting you to focus on a sort of, the playwright we'll obviously talk about later has talked about, theatre. She wants to encourage empathy. That's kind of her sort of one of her raison d'etre in writing. She's very keen to focus on, empathizing with feelings, but it's kind of something that just didn't have any kind of interest, and yet it was kind of there. You were aware of a sort of sexual energy and attention in the early parts of the play, but again, it wasn't really what the thing was about. It just kind of seemed random.
It was better with those kind of like hat tips to that, or the nudge and the winks, etc., as opposed to the act itself. I mean, my thoughts are that it was something that comes out of 60s and 70s theatre in an attempt to kind of shock and quote unquote push boundaries.
Yes.
But what do you do when all the boundaries have been pushed? You end up in this kind of post boundary setting with like those intimacy coordinators, and so it really served no purpose. So let us continue. But I want to hear more about you're delving into the intimacy coordinator some of the time.
The intimacy,
sounds fascinating. Yeah.
Well, I should have got the guidelines up actually that were there, but I mean, it was again, I think it's this thing of people talk about the therapeutic state a lot these days, and it's one of those things that sort of annexes a lot of that same formalism of behavior. And in the performance space, it just seems kind of at odds with the sense of what you're doing as an actor and a director in a play. I mean, the word is play, and it's drawing people back to the idea that you don't really have play. You actually have kind of dangerous sort of improvisation of action on a stage that's sort of threatening in some way. And it has to be managed, and your perception of it has to be managed. So you have to be told that no animals were harmed during the course of this film, or these people weren't really sort of rubbing each other up erotically. They were all completely shielded and protected in the appropriate areas, and they were watched like a hawk in case anybody did anything naughty. And it builds up this sort of sense of performance that's kind of like decaffeinated or like something. It's no longer performance where you're suspending your disbelief. Yes. It's like the play. We're going to talk about the design. It's kind of stripped back and Brechtian, and you're aware of all the artifice. But this sort of stuff is kind of creeping into theatre, and you're seeing the credits there, and you're kind of aware, I suppose, that so there's coordination, control of these things, but at the same time, it's another layer of kind of alienating you from the play. It's another sort of intervention by another class of person who's inserted themselves into a sense of grievance in performance and made it a kind of an area, a domain, a sort of fiefdom. And everything has to be perceived through this, intimacy has to be something controlled and framed and sort of carefully scrutinized. And in a way, it feeds into a lot of the themes of the play, that everything has to be surveilled in this extremely deadening way.
Yes, definitely. Okay, so they have that little scene. Then the narrator comes back on to kind of talk about how these tapes, these recordings, were all leaked online by an infamous Reddit poster. And again, I just laughed out loud that Reddit gets a shout out at the Royal Court. Does anyone in the room have an idea what a Reddit is? I don't know. You did get a feel, didn't you, that sort of some of the research the playwright had done on online culture was kind of still a little bit at boomer level, wasn't it? It's I mean, I thought it was good, but it was kind of like like limited, or kind of like you could tell as a bit of an expert, as a bit of an expert myself. You could immediately kind of tell through some of it, but no, that did make me laugh.
Because there's slight things through the play which, in this way, they're slightly jarring. Because the playwright mentions that the poster on Reddit is someone called a username Watch with Mother 89. Now Watch with Mother was like an old children's program from like the 1950s and 60s. I mean, so it's kind of well out of the memory of the people in this play who are kind of millennial Gen X. Yeah. So there's little oddnesses like that which will crop up later as well, which we'll talk about. I mean, the thing about the tapes, this is again, it's this thing of abandoning certain technologies and kind of jumping down a level to the previous technology. The idea that I found it bizarre that the idea that there were tapes involved. I mean, people sort of use it as an expression, the such and such tapes. But in this play, you're actually sort of you're gonna actually see that, and you're gonna see this premise in the story that these guys have been under surveillance and everything they've been doing has been recorded and taped, and that forms the substance of this play text, this story that's been edited down for you to digest.
The other key thing that was brought up in this kind of little bit of narration was the introduction of person F12, who apparently was the neighbor of the Quilters, and seems to be connected to the recordings. Now, interestingly, they mention him in this section and then don't really bring him up again after this point. So it's this kind of shadowy figure lurking in the background. Maybe he's a government figure. Maybe he's an obsessed with Celeste. Maybe he's just a plebeter. Who knows? But I thought it was interesting how it was almost kind of like a throwaway character in some ways, just this kind of nefarious shadow in the dark.
Yes, and it's kind of hinted that he's the kind of he's just the kind of unpleasant lurker on the internet, the kind of the figure that's been built up in people's minds. I mean, they say, as you're referring to in the text, you know, the supposition is either he works for the state, you know, or, you know, he's you know, someone who has well, she says he might have been disposed of after having outlived his use, or he might have taken his own life after realizing the horror he'd been accessory to, or the other possibility, he was just a creep. I've edited that slightly, but this notion that there's the kind of silent horde of, you know, sort of unpleasant young men on the internet watching everything, that's kind of sort of strongly hinted at throughout.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's reference later to kind of incels as well, so that's in her kind of vocabulary, her mental vocabulary, so to speak. Okay, on to the next scene. So we kind of see Noah creating a table, and then Celeste talking about something. Now, one thing that really triggered me here, Simon, was that Noah asked for an Allen key, but he was screwing in the leg of the table, and then did not use the Allen key. Now, as someone who's created many an IKEA piece of furniture, to my shame, I was very annoyed at that little detail.
Pharaoh, I want to show you how much I've done my research now, because I realized watching that obviously that particular table, which is the IKEA Lack coffee table, does not require an Allen key to assemble. And also, I noticed in that room they also have the IKEA Leerhammen kitchen table. They had an IKEA Froster stool, the IKEA Ekra hat and coat stand, the IKEA Klippan sofa, and the IKEA Slattum bed and headboard. So this is another element of the design that, again, these are the kind of people of global homogeneity, you know?
Yeah, and also I think Lucy here is trying to create maybe an idea of like the Red Wall conservative, if that makes sense. These kind of like working class people with socially conservative values, you know. And again, I mean, we can talk about it at the end. I feel like there's a lot of like nasal gazing at this type of person and their beliefs and stuff, and like how stupid they are. But again, it's interesting that again, the kind of left intelligentsia has kind of recognized this type of person. You know, this they have kind of quite extreme views by the standards of your bourgeois middle class Guardian reader. But so, anyway, so he's working on the DIY. Again, that was great research, Simon, by the way. Amazing. Also, sorry, quick question, Simon. Are you okay?
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
I'm just here. Just make sure. I'm just coaching you. Just make sure you're okay. But Celeste goes on about how she's heard the story that you can cure HIV with a yoga move or something like that. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. So you've got, as you say, you've got this sense that these are people that maybe the playwright is treating with a kind of a certain benign contempt. You know, they are sort of they're not absolute, you know, the absolute trucks of the world, but they're sort of, you know, they're susceptible people. That's the thing. It's that feeling that they're nice, maybe nice people, but they're susceptible in some way to myth and hearsay and things like conspiracy theories, and you know, they can sort of they all have a weak point, you know, in their personae, that somehow one sort of conspiracy appeals to them, to one person, and another to another person, because of particular kinds of, you know, perceived lack of worldliness in some way, you know, from the point of view of the playwright.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point about the susceptibility of the working class. Just on that, so basically, Noah hears the story from Celeste about this powerful yoga move, and then just challenges her, and then she agrees with him and says, "Oh, it is a stupid idea." So again, Noah has the power to, you know, to convince her otherwise. Again, so she's changed her opinion just on being called out, which again I thought was interesting. She just agreed with what he had to say. Okay, so then it breaks to another narration again, and then they're kind of going on about how people saying that Noah was kind of violent and controlling but maybe not necessarily. It was again different opinions from different people, and how Noah started to receive calls from withheld numbers. So again, at certain points in the rest of the play, Noah will start to get kind of like his phone will start to go off and no one replies back. So again, the phone call is a really interesting device as like this ominous spectre, just like person F12, who's kind of lurking in the back of your memory. Who is that person? Is he a government agent? Is he a friend? Is he an ex-girlfriend or something like that? Lots of questions being asked about it. So and then they kind of she concludes with saying that they kind of properly move in together, basically, and this is the kind of the beginning of couple life, isn't it? So
yeah. So you see them starting to, the edges are kind of getting rubbed off a bit, and they're learning to sort of deal with the mundane, this is the honeymoon period sort of somewhat beginning to wear off, I guess, quite quickly, really, in the context of this play, because this is a play that's going over a span of 10 years or so. So this is quite an accelerated rate of change in the characters' moods and circumstances. But yes, you're seeing them sort of after the honeymoon has kind of, the honeymoon glow is kind of worn off. You're seeing them dealing with taking out the bins and all of that sort of thing. And this is kind of them bonding. At the same time, you're starting to introduce the sort of the complications of real life, and so on. Yeah,
exactly. I thought, again, it wasn't that interesting or useful scene, in my opinion. It's a bit of padding.
Yeah.
So then it goes into the kind of next section. I thought this was kind of interesting. So it goes about how Celeste's trying to look for a new job.
Yeah.
But then Lucy mentions this. She says, Noah stays at home most days, ostensibly looking for work, but actually spending hours reading both The Guardian and the Daily Mail online. He's also a frequent poster on various message boards, mainly threads about climate change, corporation tax, and the "Am I being unreasonable" section of Mumsnet. I'll read through the rest of this before.
It's relevant.
It's a good section. He's repeatedly accused of trolling, but actually reading his comments, and there are like a lot of them, it simply feels like he's trying and failing to find his tribe. His views don't fit into a single subculture. He's disillusioned by democracy as practiced in Westminster and Washington, but appalled by the alt-right's racism and misogyny. He's passionate about the environment and equality, but frustrated by the left's obsession with identity politics and its abundance of white middle-class girls telling people off for things on Twitter. He seems to sit completely alone in a cramped slither in the centre of the Venn diagram, where the circles of angry, ham-fisted right-wingers overlapped with the disapproving, wave-faced left-wingers. But it turns out that he's not alone after all, because he starts making videos of himself, and within weeks he has upwards of 1,000 subscribers. So, in irony of ironies, it now transpires that I've taken Simon Roberts to the only play of the year talking about YouTube streamers.
Yeah,
in the whole probably history of the West End. So
yeah.
What a coincidence.
Indeed, he's got more subs already than me. Yeah, I mean it's.
I mean, again, this is
not bitter.
Well, exactly. This is where more triggering occurs, basically, all through anything to do with YouTube and the kind of total lack of understanding about just how tough it is out there.
Yeah,
and on that note, please like and subscribe to this video. Anyway, Karen.
Indeed. I mean, this is the thing that the reason we talked about the section where they're sort of getting to know each other after the romance and all that, because it kind of sets up from this point here onwards, doesn't it? That it's the way that they've hit the buffers as far as lifestyle goes in modernity, and from here on in, it's everything about the kind of the left liberal sort of bemoaning the failures of left liberalism, and the fact that people's lives kind of, they're not resilient, if you like, to to the emotional complications of modernity and sort of hyper accentuated capitalism and hyper accentuated communication. And this is where the sort of the tensions start to grow and emerge as he is suckered into online culture, which is the kind of sort of the boogeyman sort of trope, I guess, that we're starting to play with.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. It's basically this is kind of like a turning point where he's going from a fairly harmless, working class guy as conspiracy theorist, but it's specifically his interactions with the Guardian, Daily Mail, message boards that almost kind of radicalizes him in his opinion, spurs him on to different bits. Now, what I think is interesting for me is that he goes through a bit of a personality change because you hear these kind of earlier points. In my opinion, all kind of relatively based right wing points. Talking about controlled immigration. And then all of a sudden, she starts to inject a healthy dose of like leftism in him. A frequent posts mainly threads about climate change and corporate tax.
Yeah.
And the am I being unreasonable section of Mumsnet. Now, I don't know any right winger that would ever post on Mumsnet who's a man. I mean, that was very strange.
It's like lots of people, isn't it? You kind of start early with gateway things, don't you? I mean, I was for a long time still posting on Facebook while everybody else was on Twitter and YouTube. Being a lot more interesting and kind of you kind of tend to plow away in these kind of very earnest forums for a while. And then you kind of realize that a lot of them are sort of quite suffocating. And you're trying to sort of raise, maybe slightly what those people consider extremely edgy points in these kind of sort of quite herbivorous online spaces, as you say, like Mumsnet or, like the underneath the line on articles on The Guardian, for example, when they still allowed you to comment on such things. And obviously, I mean, this is part of the play that we have here. You see the changes actually in the social media that they're talking about, as things move on in time and as they become a bit more, if you like, seriously committed, I suppose, to certain things. So there's that sort of leaving behind certain kinds of spaces and sort of transitioning to others. And of course, as I say, lots of people perhaps start in places where they certainly don't end up in those places. They move onwards to the kind of the spicier territory as they go on.
Yeah. There's three other things that I thought was interesting. Firstly was, he's disillusioned by democracy. And I was like, this is the first play I've ever heard, which obviously acting and play is a decidedly left-wing vehicle, in my opinion. But so I was literally shocked when they said that. But they sort of modified it by saying, as practiced in Westminster and Washington. So again, sort of rolled it back. I mean, I don't know. Can you name a country outside of the US and the UK that is particularly democratic? I mean, we're talking about Russia here. I mean, they're great at democracy, apparently.
Yeah, exactly. I think this is the thing, you see, why I felt more skeptical about the play afterwards, because it did seem pretty clear that, and I guess maybe it's just because of the kind of the impression I'd formed of the royal court, of new writing in London, that you are going to get it coming from at best a left liberal position. There was a very interesting conversation I had with an actor a few years ago, and he was a conservative actor. And he was talking about being at the National when Nick Heitner used to run the National. And he'd had a conversation with him one day and sort of just sidling up to the topic and saying, how come there aren't that many right-wing plays? And unusually, Nick Heitner was actually quite open to the idea. He said, well, actually, I would love to put on right-wing plays. We just can't find any right-wing playwrights, which is interesting. I mean, I guess with the exception of someone like, I don't know, David Mamet, who sort of converted from being a liberal to being, sort of centre-ish conservative. It's kind of difficult to triangulate yourself as writing from the point of view of the right, especially in new works in theatre, because I think another part of it is that so much of the kind of critical theory underpinning in drama is, of course, always coming from the left. It's always coming from cultural commentators and viewpoints and dramatists who were of the left themselves. It's difficult to escape.
The director in one of her previous plays described it as like literal agitprop. So again, which is obviously the agitation propaganda. So during the early Soviet years, they used to put on these little plays where they would send out 2 or 3 people to a village to kind of explain how they were just getting screwed over by the Tsars or whatever. So, interestingly, acting has always been a vehicle for communism and leftism. Just quickly, the 2 other points. Firstly, was the its abundance of white middle class girls telling people off for things on Twitter. There was a second audible gasp by the audience
I didn't
being
register
called
that.
out.
That was good. That's good. You registered that.
Yeah,
You know.
literally, I was literally grinning ear to ear. But what I thought was interesting about this little passage, so again, it is the classic like enlightened centrist BS, basically, of like,
Yeah.
I'm not a misogynist, but I'm also not this identity politics wokeist.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
it's interesting, AA talking about Tony Blair and his kind of return to Fresh Prince as a concept, because again, it sort of felt a little bit like this, and one of the reasons why I felt like this is an interesting play or has some kind of base concepts is this is definitely coming straight out of the mouth of a writer who feels a little bit dispossessed by the current age.
Yes.
And I do wonder, especially for white women who are married and have kids, which I'm pretty sure she has kids. Her details about some of the some kid stuff was like, oh, she definitely, I'm 100% sure she does.
Yeah.
A lot of them who are dealing with like some of the kind of trans questions, etc., are feeling increasingly kind of edged out and don't know what to do. And so I thought this interesting, this little kind of Venn diagram where they have all of these kind of liberal views, but at the same time are ostracized by their own, the left eats its own, is interesting. And this is, in my mind, one of the first plays which actively kind of calls out the fact that that's been going on and has been happening. So I thought that was quite interesting. But anything to say on that before we move on?
I mean, it speaks to the kind of almost like the only individualism that's acceptable in the kind of progressive or left-wing cultural artistic space is the trope where you say, well, I'm neither one nor the other, I'm just trying to find my own way, and it cleaves to sort of the expressions that people use, like, well, the truth is always in the middle kind of thing, which we know is crap. The truth is just where the truth is located, and unfortunately you don't often get a say in it. But again, this is I mean, I feel as we get further into the play and we talk about the author a bit more, you'll begin to see that this is kind of the neurosis and hang up of the kind of people being described in that passage where it talks about the abundance of white white middle class girls telling people off for things on Twitter. She's kind of very much revealing there, herself to an extent.
Also note that Lucy doesn't have any social media profiles anymore. She's deleted them all, which I thought was also interesting, eye-raising. Okay, we move on to September 2014 and Noah recording his first YouTube rant. I would describe this as a PJW-esque rant, apart from it is an absolutely cursed pro-climate change, climate action rant. It's kind of like, imagine like unbased, well, I mean...
It's kind of Russell Brand like 6 or 7 years ago.
Yeah, you know what? That's in terms of references for this, I do feel like it's almost like a Russell Brand journey. That the people have gone on a little bit.
Yeah, so he does a kind of boilerplate sort of screed, inveighing against corporations, again inveighing against fossil fuels, and using very kinds of common or garden metaphors. If a company, a company's doing this, but if a person was doing this, you'd call them a psychopath. You call them a criminal. So it's very much kind of, there was. It reminds me of back in the 70s, there was a show called Citizen Smith on the telly with Robert Lindsay. And he was a guy who was like a little Marxist radical revolutionary, and he led something in his mind called the Popular Front of Tooting, and he was kind of like a kind of, beret wearing sort of Shea wannabe. And this is kind of the same sort of stuff, just, 25 years later or something, 30 years later. So it's all the kind of, if you like, the sort of typical stuff of like, a 20-something gets online and wants to change the world kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Again, there was an interesting line here about so it's talking about what's the facilitator of all of these people robbing you.
Yeah.
The facilitator is democracy. The facilitator is a house of elected representatives that we should be able to trust to fight this, and unfortunately we can't, because power protects power, and those politicians are in the pockets of criminals who are not criminals, and they're being paid to sit on their asses and look the other way while the world burns. I won't read the rest of that.
Yeah,
it's all rubbish. But
I thought it was an interesting hint of baseness. Yeah,
exactly. And again, there's this kind of little flirtations of in interesting moments. But it's all kind of like in a green and climate change vector, isn't it? Really.
Yeah, yeah. And the interesting thing is he does this thing. He makes this sort of impassioned rant to the camera on his laptop, but then he hears a knock at the door and she's come home and he suddenly sort of slams down the laptop, closes the laptop down. So you still got the sense he's still kind of hiding this. He's still kind of ashamed. This is still kind of, a bit too much.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, Simon, I just got to get a charger for my phone a second. Can you maybe talk about the more of the set design for a second?
Yeah, I'll try and sort of vamp for time for a bit. So the set design for the show is essentially it's on a stage revolve, and it's a stripped back skeleton house plan, if you like. So you've got on one side, you've got 2 rooms, you've got, the living room and the bedroom, and then they revolve the stage and you've got the kitchen. And so you've got this sense of, like a place in which people live it's been stripped back, it's been x-rayed, and you're fully able to sort of look into these people's lives. You're very conscious of the artifice of all of the changes. So you see the stage management come along and they literally grab hold of the set and they rotate it. It's a kind of this sort of this frame house, and it's kind of, in a funny way, it's sort of like a metaphor for plays as kind of like machines for telling a story, in a similar way as the characters relate through machines in the telling of this story. And you have, as I say, always upstairs. There's no upstairs in the house. They live in a bungalow. There's always this empty room where they first met, with the hole in the wall that they escaped through to this life downstairs, if you like, in the mundane world, which starts to encroach on their minds, which starts to disintegrate them as people.
Yeah, interesting. Sorry about that. So we then get the next little scene, which is no. So sorry. When Celeste enters and he shuts down his screen, they have a little chat about the Netflix settings, which again is kind of interesting, going on about how devices are recording all of the audio and this digital privacy thing. So there is this irony to the play itself, where I was brought in because it was a discussion about online identity and online privacy, and it touches upon those elements anyway. So there is almost like a truth to the.
And I actually went away and looked up this stuff about, because I don't have the Netflix app or anything. And I looked up, apparently this was more or less dated to the same time, late 2014, early 2015. There was a conversation you can come up with on Reddit where people are talking about, hang on, this Netflix thing, the app can actually listen to you. It switches on your microphone. And don't you think that's creepy? And literally the lines that they use in the play about it, you can actually go and find the Reddit posts from 7 years ago talking about this. So you get the sense that maybe she's done her research by just literally flicking different topics up and then sort of plus Reddit, and then sort of finding out what people were talking about and just abstracting the stories from there. So she's mapping it fairly closely to the changes over time.
Yeah,
in terms
of and they kind of anchor it in the time with like references to Broadchurch, which was like a very popular TV show of that year as well. So again, in kind of living millennial memory there. So they end up deciding to delete the app, and
they get rid of their Amazon Echo and their smart TV. And I don't know, as you say, it's like a lot of this stuff almost predates people's worries about these things in some ways. I mean, I don't know, were people worried about that much? The sort of Alexa and stuff like that at the time?
Again, I think maybe the more kind of leading edge people were kind of trying to digitize their lives and stuff. But I think the kind of idea of the digital detox, etc., is a relatively recent thing. So it's interesting. But again, as an attack against technology in the home and the kind of place it plays in people's modern lives, I thought was an interesting and positive message. And I think that, again, I get the impression that Lucy does to agree with that, because she's not on social media. She lives in a cottage in the middle of nowhere.
I was going to say we're going to get to that. Yeah, she's abstracted herself from all of this in a very The way that people do it in media and the arts, they tend to be very quiet about pulling themselves out of the ashes of civilization and transplanting themselves somewhere nicer.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's very Bloomsbury, how they basically
Yeah.
all left London while the world was burning, and rather than doing anything, and just had this kind of like idyllic floating world
Yes.
of whatever, like liberal romantic connections or whatever. And I get the same impression. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, they live in a Georgian workman's cottage somewhere on the Norfolk coast, and this. But meanwhile, this play, it just relentlessly takes place inside this this bungalow in. I think she sort of hints at the location as being Leigh-on-Sea in Essex, because there is actually an address that corresponds in Leigh-on-Sea.
Oh,
yeah.
Simon, have you considered a career as a private detective? This is amazing.
Oh, I've done a lot of 4chanish kind of hunting things down on the internet in the past. Unfortunately,
No, that's excellent. Yeah.
But you can tell I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's kind of one of these plays where it's somebody literally picking off the buffet of what's in the press, what's being talked about online, what's happening in reality, and just throwing it together. And at the same time, the house at that address in Leigh-on-Sea is different from the one that she's describing in the play, of course. So she plays with the little slippages again between, some things are real, but they're not quite the same in reality. They're slightly different. There's a slight twist on them, but yeah, she's definitely playing with a lot of real stuff. And there's something later in the play which I'll bring up when it comes, but because I know something personally about it, that tallies to the stuff that she's put in.
Yeah. Okay, so then it moves on a year, and again they kind of trying to have some more of these connections between kind of technology and surveillance, where Celeste has a conversation with a mysterious voice from her doorbell.
Yes. Now, I don't think this scene was actually in the performance, was it? This thing with the talking doorbell.
Yeah, so this is one thing to say. So we're both running off the old playtext that we bought at the time. However, as with all new writing, a lot of it does get cut and changed. So I bet they cut the scene out for time, because it was already running a bit long. So basically, it was a continuous run with no breaks. And normally you wouldn't ever run a play longer than an hour and a half than that, because people just will walk out after that time. The problem is, if you were to have a break in between, you need at least another half an hour of content. So I imagine they just cut out like 10 minutes worth of stuff. So I'm trying to remember. I think they had a small conversation, but it wasn't as detailed as in the playtext.
I think it got echoed later, wasn't it? Because I think the thing is, I was surprised they cut that scene, because it was quite telling. It sort of, it ignites the paranoia about technology in them, or at least heightens it after they've talked about the Netflix app listening to them. This is basically, they've got a smart doorbell on the house, and she starts hearing a voice coming from the doorbell, and it's someone apparently who's hacked the doorbell, because there's been a security breach at the company who runs they're called Ding Dong doorbells, and it starts talking to her. So it really puts the wind up her, and she gets paranoid, and then later on, as we'll find, there's a question of a baby monitor being installed in the house, and they're worried about that being hacked. So it kind of explains where that sort of paranoia is coming from.
Yeah, exactly. But it's to give that kind of impression that they're almost under constant digital surveillance and under attack from these kind of nebulous, shadowy forces in the background. Now, the narrator goes on to talk about how Noah then becomes an electrician. Is that right, or is that a bit later?
That's right. Yeah, he starts getting some work, because at the beginning of the play, we're definitely meant to read him as a kind of slacker, aren't we? Really, he's kind of a guy who's just smoking weed and having fun, And now he's
exactly
So now he's got to get his act together. He's tried to get some work. He's got some work, and they're sort of getting things to the point now where they are about to get married, essentially.
Yeah, and that's something they kind of hint at earlier as well. Like, she asked him about it, and he's like, "Oh yeah, well, something that will happen later." It was like no big deal was made out of it, and then they basically project married life. So again, they kind of go straight into that. Also, the phone rings a couple of times as well. So again, these kind of mysterious numbers. They're being constantly under attack from spam callers or whoever this person is. So now we go into the kind of married life section, and there's a whole load of stuff about football. Now, again, I do apologise. As Simon, are you a football person?
I know sod all about football. I'm famously ignorant about sport of any kind, actually. But yeah, he seems to be in a sort of he's in a tantrum about probably a footballer having let him down, and then it's kind of an odd little scene, really. It just seems to be a little bit of a hint at them, kind of the sort of fracture between them coming in some way, that their cultural references kind of don't match at some level. You know, he starts talking to her about Michelle Pfeiffer, and she doesn't even know who Michelle Pfeiffer is. So there's this sense of people having different sets of references and unable to mesh sometimes.
I think that maybe this is just a dig at millennials. Although I think Lucy's the same age. She's millennial.
Well, this is the interesting thing, isn't it? Because they're both meant to be 27 at the beginning of the play, and in 2011, where the action starts. And of course, there's a sort of strong hint, as we know, in the framing of the play, the idea that there's the play's written by Dave Davidson, the security expert who's worked in the business for 38 years, and of course. Their being 27 and his being in the business for 38 years all goes back to the origin date 1984.
Oh, I didn't even. Okay.
So yeah. So
this is stellar research.
It's just the numerological, kind of significances that playwrights like to play games with, don't they? So yeah, both the characters are born in 84. The playwright, as it happens, she's also born in 1984.
Lucy thought she was clever, but she never expected a man called Simon Roberts to call her out for
there's a little bit of slippage on that. There's one reference, I think, on Wikipedia. It says 1983, but everybody else says 1984 on the online. Okay. So
that's clever.
Yeah.
So they have that little scene again, a bit boring, nothing too interesting, and then he goes on to talk about his new project. And again, I think they approach this a little bit differently in the live performance, don't they? But it's a documentary / drama called State of Awake.
Yeah.
And she, I think he takes her through it a little bit. Is that right?
Yeah. It's it feels like, it's one of those kind of classic inflection points you get in some relationships, especially with sort of slacker generation people. I mean, as a Gen X, we were famously supposed to be a slacker generation as well. And you get into points where, the relationship is possibly not going anywhere. And the girl starts saying, "Come on, babes, you got to do something." And so you go away and you write a film. And that's a kind of that's a trope of relationships, I think, isn't it?
And again, there was some interesting little parts to kind of him describing what the film's all about.
Yeah.
And again, it's kind of trying to pull up some of his. I think they describe him as an anarchist at one point. Yeah. These kind of anti-democratic views. So this was actually another. Again, dangerously based section here. Seriously, honestly, right now, I think the very best thing we could say about democracy is you get a peaceful transfer of power, which is, lovely, but it's not going to solve climate change. Oh, God. Is it? It's not going to deliver an equal society. Okay, I'm taking that back. But again, replace those points with actual issues.
It's a kind of interesting sort of thing. It's almost like a parallel thing to the. Did you watch any of the AA retrospective where he went talked about his 4 eras? Starting off as like the anti-SJW, then it's based libertarian, and you have the algorithm progressing to, into your sort of classical liberal, and then wherever you are now, and it's almost on the left. There's an algorithm here that you start off with anarchism, and then maybe you sort of modulate that, and you go to a kind of I don't know what the next step would be from there. But it seems that he goes on that journey.
Yeah, the last part of that speech is, so what's our power? A vote, a cross on a shitty bit of paper. I know people died to get it, but honestly, if they're happy to give it to you, it's not worth having. The power we want the power we want has to be taken. The power we want has to be ripped from there, and then the baby starts crying.
Yeah.
But again, I thought interesting concepts, and again, AA talks about other people talk about what was it, the world spirit? Certain ideas transcending through a nation.
Biospirit, yeah, biospirit.
Biospirit. And I did wonder has Lucy biospirited,
Yeah, yeah.
AA stuff on the other.
It's an emergence of a kind of atavistic masculinity there that's sort of wanting to fight that system, regardless of the power disparity.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
So the kind of narrator comes back on again to talk about State of Awake a little bit more. Again, trying to she claims that it's not that he wasn't trying to raise a lawless army, that it's all about a metaphorical story in a world that no longer understands metaphors.
Yes,
and I mean, if you hear that line from Noah there, the power is to be taken, has to be ripped from their hands. It's pretty obvious that
he wants to clear them out.
He wants to clear them out in a violent sense. And again, Lucy is sort of delusioned here. I think again. So you got this idea that even the narrator is this kind of biased person who is trying to kind of rehabilitate the quilter reputation. Yeah. But you hear the words out of his mouth, and he's very definitely trying to raise a lawless army, basically. But
at the same time, I think there's also that element, though, isn't there, of the way the internet doesn't do nuance. The sort of problems obviously people encountered early on of doing exchanges online and not being able to indicate sarcasm, for example, and people misreading it and being unable to have agree on what the idiom was. In one sense you could say yes, I mean, he's absolutely deadly serious about it. He's fired with the kind of the fury of the zealot. At the same time, you can sort of say things online, you can get a bit fed posty, but then again, you probably also you're sort of tripping over a line, aren't you, where you're saying, look, I'm saying this for emphasis, but I'm not necessarily saying I'm going to do this, if you know what I mean. There's always that kind of internet ambiguity that you kind of can't always frame properly. And internet culture, when it's translated through a third party like a narrator or somebody collating evidence, as this character is the playwright here, it can never kind of quite convey what's actually happening, the subtlety of that.
Yes, it's kind of filtered through her lens or whatever. The narrator also makes reference to the fact that they're both trying to conceive, and that she goes to a specialist in fertility massage in Chelmsford, who instructs her to apply a hot flannel soaked in castor oil on her stomach for half an hour every evening. And again, I thought this was quite an interesting, again, if a bit snide look at some of the kind of working class practices. Because again,
it's like an old wives' tale kind of piece of advice.
Yeah, exactly. And you get a lot of this in kind of working class cultures where they'll do strange things because their mother told them to do it or that a friend recommended, just kind of like purely innocently. And again, I think this is kind of like where I think Lucy crosses over into the taking the piss levels, if I'm honest with you, and kind of being a bit snide about it. Like, look how stupid these people are putting a flannel of oil on their stomach.
Yes. Yeah, it's the kind of ever so slightly well-concealed sneering paternalism of kind of the liberal writer, isn't it? It's that sense in which the little people have their superstitions. We must let them get on with it. But that's kind of what it's doing. It's sort of placing it in that sort of spectrum of facts and science, and then there's conspiracy theories, and then there's kind of old wives' tales, and there's a sort of a continuum of disorientating and distorted beliefs, and you have to kind of in your place as the kind of the overseeing godlike playwright, you have to kind of sort of show sympathy in some way without sort of coming out and saying this is outright crap.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so then Celestina have this kind of conversation about she had like an official complaint, but I didn't really get the point of this. It was just kind of like a place to complain about people.
I think it's kind of recording the point where she starts to fall out with the system, essentially, isn't it? She's getting stress and pressure from her job. And she's switching off. She's realizing that the big system that she thought loved her isn't going to love her back.
Yes, exactly. Interesting, yeah. And kind of getting, how do people fall out of society is asking that question.
Yeah.
So there's some other bits that they have a bit of an argument about that. And then there's some stuff that wasn't in the actual play. And then there's another narration section again, which talks about that kind of being fizzled out. Sorry.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, no. And they talk about Celeste having difficulties with child, trying to have a child. Again, no doubt it's a very millennial experience with women starting so late or whatever. So,
and then it comes up to I mean, I don't know if I'm racing too far ahead, but it comes up to a little speech which I picked out.
Okay,
because this kind of did speak to a lot of those thematics that I referred to earlier. That this play is, as I say, it's a liberal left grieving for the failure of that project. That belief in science, and rationality, and it's where the character's sort of coming up with that she's a nurse, she's in the healthcare profession, she's probably got a better idea about conceiving babies, but she kind of succumbs to the kind of old wives' tale of having a rag doused in castor oil on her stomach to help her conceive. She's kind of it's the way that modernity doesn't speak to the kind of desperation that people are left with. Techno-modernity kind of leaves them abandoned. And he has this speech where there's this sort of darkest before dawn moment. She's really despairing. Are they going to ever have a baby? And he says, I believe in gravity, I believe in biology, I believe in time, I believe in probability, I believe in how much we love each other, and I believe in good things come to those who wait, and it'll happen when we least. And and he starts sort of trotting out commonplaces to kind of try and console her. And he says, you're doing all this great stuff, and you're taking the folic acid and the acupuncture and the Brazil nuts and the low carb diet and the castor oil. So it's gradually he's sort of devolving down from, I believe in all the science, and I believe in all the kind of old wives' tale stuff as well, and you get the sense that that's the point where the left is kind of realizing that it's got little less, the kind of the gospel of techno-modernity is falling very thin at this point, and people are falling into irrationality. And everything kind of devolves down to a state where people are they're ready to basically go for witchcraft at this point.
Anything to make things happen. Okay.
Yeah. It's
they
kind
end up
of
managing to sorry
go and they have the baby, but lo and behold they have a baby.
They have a baby, have a discussion about the baby monitor, and again they're worried again. You're right. They reference the doorbell at this point, which again was cut in in what we saw. So again, Noah's basically like, you're not having that. And again, they make a reference to radiation coming out of the monitor, and then Celeste does some Googling, and then just says, it's cool, I can return it. So again, this concept of susceptibility, all you need to do is just to kind of Google something, see a forum, and then all of a sudden your mind's going to change like that. So
there was something very there was something at the beginning of this scene, actually, I found it was actually quite sad. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm just being sort of slightly patronizing, but the bit where they've got the baby and they're trying to get it to sleep at the beginning.
Yes.
And they did this little act of sort of singing quietly to it.
Yeah.
And they were singing Here Comes the Hot Stepper.
Oh, that's very cringe.
And it's
sorry.
Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I'm getting at here? There's something very sad about the fact they don't have any kind of traditional nursery rhymes or anything like that. And I'm not sort of going on a riff here of, they should be singing Bar Bar Black Sheep or anything like that.
Yeah.
But do you see what I'm saying? There's something kind of like a disconnect.
This I see millennials, people in my social circles do stuff like that all the time. We are possibly the most cringe generation ever created as a representation of...
Don't be too self-hating. There's plenty of that in this play. But do you know what I mean? Because I didn't actually know when I read the stage direction, because when they were singing it on the night, I sort of
Yes.
recognized the song, but I didn't know what it was because I'd never
Yes,
actually
yeah,
heard
yeah.
the song title, Here Comes the Hot Step. And then I went away and looked it up tonight on YouTube, and I saw the video, and it's a big fat black guy doing this song, and there's hoes in, bikinis and stuff.
That's it. It's just like a gangster rap song, isn't it?
And I think he's using it as a nursery rhyme, and it's kind of,
It's over. Absolute ashes at that point.
Exactly. Yeah. It says something.
Okay, so Celeste returns the baby monitor, and then the narrator then says, by May 2018, Noah is finally ready to share the final edit of State of Awake with Celeste. So you basically see the end title scene or whatever, and after Noah showed it to Celeste, and she's kind of like positive to it, and then but also, hesitant at the same time. But again, there's some great lines. There's some great lines that.
So he's clearly made this extremely energetic, violent, edgy kind of cri de coeur kind of film, and put these various fantasy scenarios that he'd like to see happen in it. Do you want to go over them?
Yeah, I'll read some of the lines out here. Shall I be Celeste here?
Yeah, go ahead.
It is good. It's amazing. That bit where you guillotine Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, it looks really real, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was amazing, that extra. We had to shave his head 3 times. He was good as gold.
Just a note, extras. Again, that was a great line because extras do stuff like that all the time.
Yeah.
And the one with the beard, that's Richard Branson.
Richard Branson.
Obviously, but fair play. But
what?
Can I just
go on?
Because I just worry that I don't know. I know you don't mind upsetting people, but I do think like you'll just put some people off completely by when I'm trying to deep breath. I just worry that some people will be upset when you chop off Stephen Hawking's head.
What?
I just think it's a bit too much. Was he that rich? Plus, he's already dead.
No, that's Bill Gates.
Yeah, and there was an audible laugh at that point. That's really good. But
yeah.
Again, I like it as State of Awake is this kind of like power fantasy of the working class man who feels totally disillusioned with the system, and what he wants is the execution of these kind of rich and powerful people.
Yeah,
and again, it's interesting his choices again. Bezos, I think, is universally hated by left and right. I mean, Branson again. He's not.
That's an odd one because he's kind of he wasn't exactly. He's not very current, Branson, is he?
No, exactly. He's almost dead, isn't he? Basically, I think he's on the way out. So,
and the kicker in the joke is when she says the guy she thinks is Stephen Hawking being executed, who's supposed to be Bill Gates. She notices though he's wearing an Apple Watch and it's not very on brand for him.
Yeah, exactly. And he has has a little bit of a freak out. But again, that was a nice little touch that I thought was quite cool.
Yeah, I mean, again, maybe that's again, she's talking about a phase that people go through is wanting a kind of pornography of violence as part of the solution. It is kind of part of one of the imprisoning things of the online space is people indulging in and pondering, that day, where you take out your enemies and you're confusing that with actually doing anything.
It's an interesting point around the positive vision versus negative vision discussion as well.
Yeah,
because that's a purely negative vision, just the total destruction of your enemies, as opposed to a positive vision, which is looking to kind of create something new. So, so again, it's interesting that.
But it also speaks to kind of containment as well, doesn't it? Because it's that thing of, well, we'll just let people get on with this stuff where they can have these fantasies online, and that will sort of lance the boil. That will take the energy out of this. People, they can sort of have their rants, they can have their sort of lurid imaginings of what they're going to do to the elites. But maybe that helps take it away from any sense of real commitment.
Exactly,
to a political process of some kind.
Yeah, it's almost kind of like a pastiche as well. This kind of ridiculous. Yeah, it's kind of mocking it. There's a mocking element to the whole documentary as well. But either way, we can have a little bit more discussion, and then Lucy tells us that Stake of Awake is impressive, but they just don't do anything with it at all. It doesn't actually get launched. I think he sort of keeps it behind, maybe because of Celeste's negative comments about it at all.
Yeah.
So basically, then they kind of talk about Celeste joining the channel, and again, there's a great line here. But it's when Celeste suddenly starts appearing in them in January 2019, the channel really takes off. And again, that's the one true YouTube thing. Absolute simps, beta orbiters following his channel now. Absolutely outrageous.
I sort of remember this slightly, actually, because I don't know. Do you remember Alistair Williams, the comedian who did the Brexit Burger King routine?
No.
He was kind of had a sort of bit in, he was in the sort of limelight on YouTube for a while. He did this very funny routine comparing, leaving the EU to a group of friends, trying to leave Burger King, and having to cut a deal with the manager to sort of pay him off. And it was a very funny analogy when he did it. And he launched his own channel, and he kind of sort of went down a little bit of a populist anger line, and a little bit of rabbit hole stuff as well that had gone in there. And I remember there was times where actually he sort of had his kind of very attractive girlfriend kind of popping into the thumbnails of videos, and you would see people probably looking and sort of wanting to see her in the video, where it was mostly just him talking to camera. But I think it was that thing of people kind of slightly annexing, if you like, the ornamental to enhance their YouTube profile. But one of the funny things, because we talked about this, didn't we? Like they seem to build up a massively successful channel, and it says in that particular section, by Christmas 2019, they've got 1.2 million subscribers, and are putting out 2 videos a week. And I thought, wow, so they must be getting some hella super chat money. If they're doing this properly,
or even you just need, like, even if you have 10% viewers, you're making like $100,000 a month basically at that kind of level. So it's serious wedge. But they basically talk about how poor they are later. So again, these guys don't know the economics of YouTube. Maybe they're on Odyssey. Maybe they've been kicked off YouTube. I believe it then if they're on.
I mean, you could be sort of generous to the playwright and say, well, maybe she's playing with an air of unreality again. They've got all these subs, but they kind of don't know how to monetize. And you think that's kind of not how it works, is it? You couldn't have a channel that big and just put out 2 videos a week and have people stick with it.
Yeah. Okay, the next scene is them receiving an ominous letter, and they're reading out the line, an investigation has been started. It's and he says it's officious, it's threatening, and then it turns out that it's actually a TV license letter.
Yeah.
So again, there's the line. We don't appreciate being made to feel like we're living in a police state. So again, actually, they're kind of highlighting these like little authoritarian moments of nightmarishness that we live in the modern age, where people are getting shaken down for not having a TV.
And the stress that put people under. I mean, I remember that actually a few years ago was a kind of thing, wasn't it? There was a few, I mean, certainly from where I was still probably stuck on Facebook or something, but there was a lot of people sort of getting very agitated about the license fee, quite rightly in my view, because I think the BBC is currently not deserving of it. But there was a sort of division between people who were sort of angry about the license fee, and there were people who would put pages up where they'd sort of tell you, well, this is how you evade them, this is what you have to do, and you don't have to let them into your home and all this stuff. And you could take that advice, and you could just, like, as I did, I cancelled my license. You just go onto the website and you cancel the license. That's it. You don't get any more letters. But there were some people who kind of, you sense they just kind of kept on wanting to kind of tweak the nose of the license people and draw them into fights, and you sort of felt, well, guys, why aren't you just taking your own advice? Just cut the BBC off, just don't have it, But it was this sense that they wanted to take on Goliath in some way, and this was a sort of another kind of social media sort of wave that swept through. That people were wanting to sort of fight the iniquity of the license. Well, all you can really do is just say, well, just sign the declaration, say I'm not paying it, and that's it. But as I say, there was people who were wanting to kind of, this is, these guys came to the door today and I gave them a hard time, and people kind of made a big thing about how much sort of kind of sadistic fun they got out of it. And you thought, yeah, that's kind of a bit sad, isn't it? If you don't want to pay your license, just don't pay your license.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I think one advantage of having, just going all the way back to the beginning, where they kind of like trailing the quilters' deaths, is that you're constantly on the lookout for what's the thing that's going to kill them. So again, like this, what turns out to be a totally undangerous letter at first has this dangerous appeal to it. So again, that idea of the foreshadowing at the start gives the narrator quite a lot of power over how people approach different items and think about different bits.
Yeah.
Anyway, move on to 2020, and of course, it's COVID time. The Kufa's here, and Celeste, being hashtag brave NHS warrior that she is. She comes home and going on about do not resuscitate, and Noah saying how some of it's a bit sus. I mean, again, they were flirting with the unmentionable here, I thought, a little bit. I was amazed they got this through.
Yeah.
But then they sort of turn it into kind of like a complaint about PPE. And then basically Celeste goes out to see one of her friends, even though it's during lockdown. And of course, they have the 8 o'clock clapping, which I forgot about. I try to forget about as like this cringe moment, this kind of
I still wake up screaming.
I sometimes dream, Simon, that I'm down a labyrinth and then Nigel Farage is banging his pot.
He's there in like a rabbit head or something like that. Yeah,
exactly. And he's chasing me. That's my name.
I mean, there's a thing in there, isn't there, that maybe this is one of the points where I was thinking, when we discussed it immediately after, maybe this gave you the sense that the reading of the play could actually be a bit even-handed, in that she, the woman working for the NHS, actually is the one who is rejecting the sort of adulation for the NHS. She's and I think she's also the one that's sort of skeptical, isn't she, about the Coof?
Exactly. Like, even the fact that they were flirting with questioning the narrative around it, in my mind, is revolutionary. And again, a lot of the kind of leftist mindset wouldn't even dare question any of these kind of core concepts.
But it sort of hops about there, don't they? Because they make it safe again in a very short time, because there's a scene where she's unpacking the shopping and wiping it down with antiseptic.
Yeah, that's true. Again, I wonder whether the real point of it is this kind of attack on the hypocritical nature of conspiracy theorists. Do you know what I'm saying? I think because they'll believe one thing, that they won't follow the lockdown rules, but then they'll do this. Do you know this? So I wonder whether it was, again, just trying to
the randomness, the inconsistency.
Scold them for their kind of inconsistent views. You say that you don't believe in science, but then you believe some of science. You say you believe science for birth control, but then, do you know what I'm saying? So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yes, and it's interesting. It says that they seem to enjoy the lockdown. This is the thing. They're these people who they're not quite the laptop class, but they have this moment where they kind of come together as a couple, and they're making bread and, looking at the blue sky and, having a great time in a way. It's kind of it's an odd kind of hiatus from the kind of stress and anxiety of their lives, sort of plugged into the online. And he starts making a film, a documentary. He gets crowdfunding. And it seems like, maybe he's kind of softened, and he's kind of sort of paying attention to nature and, thinking that things are kind of going okay now.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to make reference before we get to that was he makes reference to the fact that Prince Harry rang him from America and was having a wobble about Megxit and stuff like that.
Yeah,
and again, Celeste asks, sort of doesn't ask him outright if he's joking or not, but again, this idea of what's true and what's not true, and again, that's the last time we hear about Harry again. So again, an interesting little
callback, as they would say in comedy.
Yes, exactly. And again, I think it's quite good at having these little callbacks and confusions. It's this kind of labyrinth
Yeah.
where more and more objects are placed inside your mind. But yeah, do you want to carry on? So talking about the project.
So I mean, it's moving on where he's starting to get her involved in the videos that he's doing on this wildly successful YouTube channel, and I think she's kind of it's slightly awkward at first. She's kind of a little sort of reluctant to sort of leave the old world, if you like, the reassurances of the old system, even though she's kind of turned off from it. She's somewhat darkening in her mood as they begin to sort of go deeper down this sort of thing. She's trying to hold on to their life as it was, and it's kind of sort of flaking around them. And she's becoming depressed while he's kind of becoming more kind of manic, if you like. I think she's the sort of depressed element and he's the manic element of this kind of bipolarity in this relationship. And the where am I getting to? I'm just looking here. So this is the funny thing here that I saw. There's a line I picked out where he's getting her to talk on camera. And she says, the only acting I ever did was being the bubblegum machine in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Yeah, I didn't know that reference.
No, yeah, I think it sounds like she's done a school play basically, and she played,
right, okay.
But the only way she can, the only sort of way she's kind of, part of this play, revolves around the idea of truth coming through the machine in some way. And that felt like a kind of an emblem of a kind of millennial detachment, that the only thing she can relate to in terms of having acted or played a persona or told a story is playing a machine.
Interesting.
Maybe I'm reading too much into it.
No,
it's
I like it.
It's just kind of an odd line that stuck out, and I thought, yeah, because there's something sort of oddly detached about them from this point onwards, isn't there? They do get more kind of, I mean, she seems a very vivacious character at the beginning of the play, and by now she's kind of getting zoned out.
Yeah, worn down. She goes, Noah records her doing this kind of big rant about how crap the NHS is, but it's not like NHS is crap in a based way, it's in a cringe way. They're kind of like, she's like saying, oh, there's no pillows, there's people in the streets, they're using food banks and all this kind of nonsense stuff. But again, like, she's kind of worn down, fed up at the system, and like Noah's lapping it up. Again, that's quite like a perverse moment where he's kind of egging her on and enjoying her misery because it makes great footage for his documentary. So again, I thought that was an interesting take about some of the kind of misery porn that's out there. People just people enjoying and taking pleasure in finding miserable people to kind of suit their message or whatever. I thought that was interesting. Noah then goes on to do a relatively cringe Albert Einstein quote. I've got to say that I've never heard a good Albert Einstein quote, but here it is. The world as we've created it is a process of our thinking, not true. We cannot change it without changing our thinking. So there we go. Think differently. And he says, I think my thinking is changing a lot at the moment. So again, interesting, this idea of evolution of his personality. He started out as this kind of like normal guy with a few kind of quirks, hit online, becomes this kind of big conspiracy theory guy, a lot of anger, a lot of hate. He's killing, he wants, he's got this power fantasies, and then his mind's changing again in this kind of post-COVID world, and maybe, like you said, mellowing out a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, that, as you say, cringe. That's his kind of his AA moment. Martin Luther King quoting something.
Oh yeah, exactly. That'll be screen capped and then play back to him later. Now the next little section didn't happen in the play, so I'm going to skip it. And they go on about how he joins a Kill the Bill march. And then assaulted by the police, basically, during the time.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of, again, it's this thing, isn't it? As sort of, it's like these kind of state of the nation kind of epic series that you might see on TV, or you used to see years ago, like, I don't know, Our Friends in the North or something, where it kind of goes through a sort of panoply of historical events and our heroes happen to turn up at them. And, it's he's doing the full tour of everything that's happened, like being arrested and fined by the police for being on an empty beach. And now he's gone to a riot and he's been assaulted by a police officer. So he's kind of like getting into the playwright's kind of posting that he's going through the whole mill of demoralization.
Exactly. And during that protest, he captures 10,000 hours of footage, which that can't be right.
I think that's about what they when they filmed Spinal Tap. I think that's about how much they actually had, like 10,000 hours, which they had to sort of render down to like a 2-hour cut or something.
But,
something ridiculous. They had like loads of improvisation.
This is one protest here. This is one protest. So in a day.
Yeah, that doesn't seem possible.
400. He's got a year's worth of continuous footage. Anyway, so interesting. I thought, again, that was a little interesting. Is it BS? Is it the correct figure? Who knows?
Yeah.
And it's stored in 2 SanDisk professional G-RAID desktop drives. I had a picture of it on the screen. Now, one thing I did notice, again, I'm doubting myself now, Simon, having...
Yeah. Well, we both saw little things, didn't we? That we thought, it could be a trick of the light, so to speak, couldn't it? I mean, what did you thought you saw on the SanDisk?
I still believe that I saw the British Fascist Party logo, just like a red circle with like a white arrow on it, on the SanDisk, and they kind of had it like as it was a Reddit post. They would occasionally use the projector to kind of show different like visual elements of the
evidence from the scene. Yeah,
exactly, but mainly Reddit posts basically. So you were seeing everything through the Reddit.
Exactly, and I remember I nudged and said to you that because there were 2 clear things on the actors that they both came with tattoos. This was another kind of like, oh, this is a millennial marker. At the beginning of the play, he had one on his arm. I couldn't quite tell what it was, but she had one on her leg. And I said to you, do you think that looks like a Sonnenrad? It looked like a Sonnenrad with like flames coming off it, and that's what made us maybe go down the line of thinking, oh, maybe there's a kind of a slightly subversive thing here. Yeah. But we couldn't tell that in the final analysis whether she had that.
Yeah. So then it goes to a projection saying final days, and basically they get broken into on the 5th of November 2021, and basically the hard drives get nicked, and Noah, like Celeste, starts freaking out, and Noah's like he's going to get serious now. At this point, basically, he says. And Lucy comes in and basically says no one figures out who they were, figures out who stole it, but they think it's person F12. So, the consensus on the forums is the person F12. So again, I thought that was an interesting, the conspiracy. What's being built up here is that we're actually creating a conspiracy theory of our own live. Yeah, and again, different truths are just created from consensus on message boards.
Yes. It's sort of layered narratives here. Everything's kind of in flux. Everything's kind of shifting. Who do you believe? Do you believe this lot? They're kind of already suspect because they're online people who are clearly crazy. I mean, that's what's being sort of signposted, isn't it? And then at the same time, it's the researcher, the playwright, and yet it's not the playwright. It's a person playing an avatar of the playwright. So you constantly got this slippage of reality that you're being asked to follow in an increasingly fragmented way.
No, exactly. Now this next section, a lot of it doesn't get used, so I'm gonna cut it from this.
Yeah.
And Celeste kind of gets out of bed in the middle of the night and says she hears a voice.
Yeah.
And she says the voice says, "I'm angry," and I'm angry. And they kind of reference the kind of ghost of her mum, which is kind of referenced all the way back in the first little scene. And and then they kind of seem like they become kind of shut-ins. A friend comes to visit, but they don't want to open the door, and it's a friend of Celeste who leaves some presents, basically. So they've gone kind of full offline, but they've also
socially withdrawn as well
yes,
from IRL.
Exactly. So again, kind of, becoming full incels at this point or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, this is very much where it got to me when I said to you, I felt the thing is like a kind of, it's the liberal writer giving us a morality play. Essentially saying, look, this is what happens when you go on and you talk to the crazy internet people. You kind of lose your mind. You become withdrawn. You end up like a kind of Howard Hughes figure, naked and gibbering in the corner of a room, with a sort of antiseptic phobia, and you ultimately drop out and die. It's the kind of the sort of horrific vision of, again, techno-modernity that eats you.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of following on from that, Celeste loses her job at the NHS, and Noah apparently gets one bad 1-star rating on Google, and then he doesn't get any more reviews anymore. So again, this idea that our entire lives are just determined by a single social media comment or a review. But again, this is where I was kind of laughing, because number one, electricians are so in demand. People will literally just take anyone, and they charge so much that you just need to work like 1 or 2 days a week, and you're laughing. And then secondly, like Simon said earlier, they're probably making so much cash from YouTube at this time that
it's kind of like a sort of, it's kind of like a Black Mirror episode, isn't it? But it kind of it's losing the sort of consistency of the story is flaking away towards the end. It doesn't hold together even as well as a Black Mirror thing does, where that kind of follows a kind of perverse dark logic right through, and whereas this just begins to sort of disintegrate as the play goes on.
Yeah. Now we come to I'll describe it as a very strange twist moment, or like maybe the writer was feeling like it was getting a bit too static and normal. And basically the presents that were dropped off by the friend who wanted to visit them, Celeste goes to the front room and opens one of them, and it's a china vase shaped like a hair. Then you start to see Celeste starting to rock and spasm, and then dropping the vase. And in the play, she makes like a big sound, like a scream or something like that. And then Noah runs in and holds her, but her body jerks backwards and forwards. Now, the next scene, you hear Noah speaking to someone on her phone, and he's just having a benign conversation with someone talking about TV. You're only hearing one side of it, and so you hear things like, "Yeah, I know, but everyone says it's amazing. Not much, to be honest. Celeste got raptured today."
Yeah.
So hence the name of the play, Rapture. So again, just for those who don't know, rapturing is it's kind of like a Christian concept that during the final
the end times,
the end times, the elect will be pulled from the earth and meet Christ in the sky.
Yeah.
So again, in some traditions, it's people will literally float up into the air, basically, and meet Christ into the air.
It's like the Johnny Cash song, actually, "Ain't No Grave." He's got the lines actually in there. "Meet me, Jesus, meet me in the middle of the air."
Yes, exactly.
Because this was a big thing, I think, in American evangelical churches back in the 80s, when you had the kind of Reaganite sort of moral majority sentiment, sweeping through from Houston, into the sort of Republican Party at that time. I'm sure one of our American colleagues will correct or modulate anything I say, but I think the idea of rapture was a sort of a very current term in the mid 80s. This sort of like a fad almost coming from America, that people were sort of whipped into this kind of this abandoned hysteria where Jesus would come down and take us away, and that's this notion that she plays on. She talks about it in the play, that the word rapture comes from a medieval French word meaning to seize or to snatch away.
Interesting, yeah. And basically, in the next scene, you hear kind of Celeste speaking to Noah and trying to describe it. She says, "I don't know how to describe it. I just suddenly saw the truth of everyone like so clearly. Because basically, what it comes down to is this place has been infected so badly. That's why it's rejecting us. But that's okay, because there's another, like a better place than this, which we don't own, but it's ours. And Dust and Candy can go there together, because you and me are basically one soul, and actually have been like since medieval times." So, and again, they have, yeah. I mean, there's lots of likes, and this is, imagine like an Essex accent. I refuse to change my accent for this for any of these readings, but it's an interesting, if slightly strange and perplexing moment in the play itself, where and again, I mean, what's your thoughts on this kind of like rapture moment?
I think it's I sort of developed some ideas in the notes where I was thinking about this. It was that sort of left liberal morality play element of it. It's basically, to me, it's the sort of writer kind of hinting that if people are left without expertise, a kind of technocratic expertise in their view, probably, and a sort of unorganized means to address power, people will just kind of revert to sort of, primitive religious spasms in some way. And that's what sort of emerges.
Almost like all of these kind of superstitions and conspiracies then physically manifest themselves into almost like a new religion idea.
Yes, yeah. There's a kind of sense. She's kind of talking about a sort of derangement of the senses goes on if this kind of conspiratorial thinking is allowed to fester in some way. I think it very much defeats or contradicts a project of the left, which is to kind of coalesce people into collectivized action against, I mean, they have their own vision of the power elites that they want to collectivize against, but it's Marxian, it's defined by Marxian class enemies for them, really, and people without, the little people, in the play, left without guidance. I mean, this is a thing I pick up very much from the kind of metropolitan paternalist left that writes plays, essentially. The actual playwright herself, Lucy Kirkwood, who we can say is definitely the playwright at this point. I mean, she uses, I've listened to a few interviews of hers. She uses a lot of religious language when she talks about plays and theatre. She talks about it being a communion, about being a cathedral of people was another phrase. And at the same time, there's this sort of, there was a quote here that she had. She was talking about when she wrote a play of hers called Mosquitoes. She said, "I really had to write Mosquitoes when Brexit happened. This is just about how a middle-class liberal intellectual class has failed the other class in our country because we haven't stopped to explain our ideas clearly enough to them in a way that isn't alienating." So basically, we have to talk down to those stupid ordinary people because they don't understand that our middle-class liberal intellectual ideas are really what's going to save them. And that's very much what I've come across with. So, it's basically a warning, if you're left to your own devices, you might end up embracing religion.
Yeah,
or some transcendence or numinous,
This is why I feel like this play has an almost base quality to it at the same time.
Yeah,
because it's written as a warning, but I see it as like,
well, yeah, absolutely. You could be
exactly.
Now, this is why I agree. Yeah, I agree that because I've a lot of this struck me as it's when I looked at her as well, the playwright. A lot of her work is kind of trying to hold back a dam that's about to burst, where the failure of the left is becoming well realized in culture, and they just realize. I mean, I often crowbar Adam Curtis into conversations because I love his work, but I mean, he's kind of an interesting kind of liberal figure because he will talk very candidly about the absolute failure of the left as a kind of a force of political ideas in the last sort of 20 years. And they haven't come up with, we haven't come up with any solutions. and he's very candid about that. And I think a lot of the left still kind of is in this moment of trying to be paternalistic, as I think this particular writer is, and yet at the same time they know they haven't got anything left in the armory, because they don't want to resort to raw power, but they do resort to raw power, but they have to do it in a kind of very disguised way, because it offends the sort of sensibilities and the sense of dignity they have. And I've been listening recently actually to a chap called Mark Fisher, who was a left-wing cultural commentator. He died a few years ago, but quite an interesting chap. He's quite sort of revered on the left. I've been listening to some of his stuff recently. Interestingly, he worked with Nick Land at the University of Warwick in the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit. But he's definitely a man of the left. But he's quite an interesting speaker, and he overlaps with some things I'm interested in, where he's got two famous things he talks about: capitalist realism, which it sort of expresses the ideological anxiety of the left, because he talks about, and I've got a quote from him, the widespread sense that not only is capitalism the only viable political and economic system, but also that it is now impossible even to imagine a coherent alternative to it. And he goes on. I've just ripped this from the wiki about him, but it talks about Fisher: the logics of capitalism have come to delineate the limits of political and social life, with significant effects on education, mental illness, pop culture, and methods of resistance. The result is a situation in which it is, quote, easier to imagine an end to the world than an end to capitalism. And I think this is very much the territory that Kirkwood, this playwright, is inhabiting here. She talks a lot about interviews about not having answers, but wanting people to empathize and sort of collectively realize a kind of common enemy, this sort of Marxist class enemy I talked about earlier. And there's this part of the play that's this also overlaps with this chap Mark Fisher, because he talks a lot about this phenomenon from Derrida called hauntology, which I'm quite interested in, because I'm interested in the music scene. And there was a sort of a bunch of groups of about 10 years ago who were very much into hauntology music. And what hauntology was is a concept to describe mourning for a future that didn't arrive. So it's often very kind of retro styled and nostalgic. And it's got a sense of yearning, though, that the kind of social utopias that were sort of planned, especially in places like Britain, in social democracy context back in the 60s and 70s, didn't kind of come to fruition in the way that they thought. So there's a sort of deep pang of nostalgia for that. And I think that's what you're left with in the sort of class of people who write plays like Kirkwood. They've just got that inherited kind of, as I say, paternalistic sense that, well, we can lead the people to the New Jerusalem, but you know what? They're just kind of not following. It's
well, that's the interesting thing. Well, look, I want to talk more about this, but let's just finish the play and then we'll we'll loop back, because I do want to pull on some of those threads a little bit. I'm going to do a super fast summary of the rest of it quickly. Basically, they after this kind of rapture moment, they apparently have like a nice time together. They're like adopt a cat, which they call hashtag, have a fun time. And then they basically in December 2021 make another video, and basically they kind of talk about basically all getting together. They've got like a big vision that they're going to kind of reveal, but they have to basically all have to meet up at Trafalgar Square on Boxing Day, basically. And so they leave kind of these kind of mysterious messages, and again this is a telling an interesting little line from the writer. So the reading list Noah and Celeste posted that day consists of text about surveillance capitalism, economic degrowth, and the toxic effects of social media on public discourse, alongside Charles Downing's seminal book No Dig Gardening, a Meghan Markle adult colouring book, and a link to a dryly written history of British security services, and a recipe by Tony Blair for an all-in-one chocolate pudding, which I thought was a particularly brilliant line as a Tony Blair connoisseur myself.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that in the play, though, isn't it? I think she relies on a lot of what you call bathos in literature. It's the what's the word? Juxtaposing the sublime and the ridiculous.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
it's kind of like interesting, some of those references to books. Again, it's surveillance capitalism, economic degrowth. Again, the toxic effect of social media and public discourse. That's what I feel like. And again, the fact that she's not on social media, I do genuinely wonder. That's the aim of this entire play. It's a vehicle to tell people to get off social media.
Yes.
Which, again, I sort of agree with, but in a different way. But anyway, basically, we see the kind of last scene of them before they head out to the 25th.
Yeah.
And then they kind of have a last hug and a kiss together, and then they open the door.
Yeah.
And then it's suddenly black. And then it says, this is where the tapes end. 3 days later on Boxing Day, a crowd starts to grow in Trafalgar Square from 6 a.m. By 11 a.m., there are roughly 10,000 people. Yet no photographs of this appeared in any major newspaper. Blah, blah, blah. Talking about the people there. I met doctors, teachers, gambling counsellors, supermarket workers, delivery drivers, transport workers, stay-at-home mums, civil servants, carers, bricklayers. Oh, man, this is like a Marxist wet dream revolutionary mixer list, isn't it? Thinking about it now,
it's interesting, isn't it? Because we had all over the lockdown period, we had all these marches and things where, again, the media were conspicuously not paying any attention to them. But as you say, this is kind of from the other side of the mirror. It's the leftist dream of, if you just tell the people about the evils that are going on, they'll be suddenly mobilized. It's kind of leftist magical thinking. If you just sort of hint at these evils, everybody will turn out, sort of stricken by this sort of conscience of the class struggle, and they'll sort of turn up.
Yeah, there's an irony with this a little bit, because Noah did that kind of like power fantasy documentary about killing people, and this in some ways is like a power fantasy, of what a Marxist wants, like a mass spontaneous public uprising against the elite.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting little bit of trivia, isn't there? They do it as a kind of broadcast on their channel, and they have interesting little bit of trivia about, did you know all of the sort of monuments in Trafalgar Square were put there to stop people having protests there, to sort of dissuade people from using the space for kind of public actions?
See, I'm want to call bullshit on that, because the lines are not.
It sounds
big.
Like it.
The lines are not that big, and they also look awesome. I'm 90% sure it's because they, like, I'm sorry to say, like, think about the volume of protesters. They don't care. They're just going to bring the guns in, Yeah,
exactly.
Anyway.
Yeah, that's the thing, though, isn't it? Yeah, it feels like a vaguely spurious factoid, doesn't it? And probably highly spurious.
Yes, exactly. And then, so basically, Lucy then interviews some people from the day, and this is one of the women who says, I stayed until dark. I stayed until most of us did, but when it got dark, it was, Boxing Day gets dark by 4, and at that point it was clear that they weren't coming. And that was, I know it sounds like woo-woo, but that was when I knew something terrible had happened to them. And then the stage lights up again, and you see Noah and Celeste holding hands with a single bullet wound through each of their heads, and a gun was in Noah's hands. And then they basically talk about the kind of the fallout from this kind of quote suicide moment. The fact that there are no signs of the couple's daughter Candice on messenger boards. Much significance was given to the fact of a 4-year-old was reportedly taken into emergency foster care in the county of Essex the night the Quilters died. There were no fingerprints on the gun. Trying to think what else. What else on this part?
Yeah, so he kind of entertains all of the kind of anxieties that you have arising in this sort of the conspiracy scene. About looking at the objective circumstances, the circumstantial evidence. You can see there are all these things which appear to be inconsistent, and the reactions seem at odds with the what's been found, and chains of evidence are broken, and you can't quite sort of follow what goes. So everything kind of sort of it's left in that kind of disrupted state that has no kind of neat sort of narrative explanation at the end, and you're kind of left sort of wondering at that moment. And then they do a kind of meta theatrical thing at this point in the play, don't they?
Yeah, just before that, one thing I would say is that you get the impression that the narrator also wanted like was on the side of the conspiracy theorists, if that makes sense. You know, she was acting like a conspiracy theorist trying to push these narratives, which again was a kind of, again, there's this like meta commentary on conspiracy itself. And then she kind of finishes up this section by just saying, you know, that all they had left was a Nokia 3310, £65 in a fireproof box, and that they've eradicated the internet from every single aspect of their lives. And she said, but if it wasn't for an algorithm used by the blind date coordinator of a newspaper owned by a company, by a corporation, by a different, even larger corporation, they might not have ever met and fallen in love at all. And so at that point, you have this kind of final twist, where a stage manager comes out and gives the actor playing Lucy Kirkwood a little a note, and then she reads out hesitantly, the roll call would like it to make it clear that both the quilters must be considered to have been in the grip of mental illness, and the most likely explanation for their deaths by far is either a suicide pact or a murder suicide. And then do you want to explain what happens next?
So then this triggers this meta theater moment, you know, where you've got and again, this is I think I remember saying to you, I thought you said, what did you think of that? And I said it was incredibly naff, you know, where you've got someone coming on from the audience going, you know, I protest, you know, and it turns out that it's the actual real playwright, so we're led to believe, of the play, Lucy Kirkwood. Of course it's not, it's another actor playing the real Lucy Kirkwood, and coming onto stage and saying, no, I didn't agree to you sort of issuing this kind of, you know, government cover-up statement. You know, this is appalling. Why are you suppressing the truth? And you know, so it becomes a little bit farcical at that point. You know, the so-called real playwright comes on and starts to say, no, you know, you're corrupting my work. You're not telling the whole truth. You know, I didn't expect to be censored at the Royal Court, this kind of stuff. So again, it's sort of tripping lightly into what you think is reality, but again, it's a very confected reality that is staged to give a kind of a sort of you know, a dramatic twist at the end, but you know, a sort of very meta theatrical twist. So it's obviously not the real playwright who's coming on, but it's the second, you know, fake playwright talking to the person playing the playwright, and, you know, remonstrating with them on stage. This is a kind of this is a scene that then gets sort of quickly ridiculous, because while there's confusion on the stage with the stage manager and the two the two playwrights acting arguing with each other, this person F12, this mysterious sinister neighbor, appears and comes up and shoots the playwright. And
she's pregnant. She's got like a pregnant belt on her or whatever. So.
And she just kind of, you know, that's it. Bop, she's dead. And you know, confusion abounds. And then, you know, the theatre's kind of plunged into a sort of a series of projections, messages on their, I presume it's like on their YouTube channel or something. It's like comments on their YouTube channel.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they make reference to an article or something like that. But again, it's just it's an interesting kind of mix of, you know, it's things like, come on, the whole crime scene was staged. No question, Freemasons are behind this framing of this courageous couple who took a stand against the powers that should not be. Stuff like that, or like the cat is the key witness, which is true.
Yeah, and it's interesting because
hashtag.
And she's kind of tying in. I mean, again, it can be potentially confusing, I suppose, because, you know, she's tying in lots of stuff at this moment with this, you know, the playwright coming on stage with real people. It's beginning to kind of cross over now. She's referring to real people, like the actual director of the play, Lucy Morrison. She talks about. This is the thing I knew about personally, you know, because she said she has a line where she says, I'm not joking, put the fucking house lights on, I'm serious, I've been really clear about this, Mel's spoken to you about this. Now I happen to know that's Mel Kenyon, who is Lucy's agent, because I met Mel Kenyon years ago at a party. So that's what triggered.
Simon goes back in time. He sends himself messages to use with certain people.
Yeah, actually, she's quite nice. Actually, we got on quite well. but that was just an odd little thing. I thought, yeah, she's kind of now tying it to real details about her life. And that sort of suggested to me that there were other things throughout the play where she was kind of, showing a bit of leg and doing that same conceit of tying some facts to it and then, being a little bit blurry on others. And then, the play sort of ends in a kind of hyperbole of sort of outrage and confusion. And, lights go up and we all leave, pondering, what happens to these conspiracy theories.
Yeah, which I said at the time to Simon, I absolutely hate. One of my pet peeves is not having a clear indicator that the play is finished. Because I've been in plays where you've waited, the house has waited like 5-10 minutes for someone to clap to show that the play was over. It was literally ridiculous. It's so awkward. I just absolutely hate it. And But so there we go. That is the end of the play. Have you got a bit of extra time just to kind of chat through?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the key lines in that last little kerfuffle scene with the they call her Lucy Kirkwood 2, but the one who's playing meant to be playing
LK2 is
LK2. She has a line. She says, "A conspiracy theory is just the wrong answer to the right question." And I thought that's kind of it's a telling comment again that speaks to this idea that I've got that, the sort of the playwriting intelligentsia, kind of are telling you to ask the right questions, and you're going down these rabbit holes which are giving you all the wrong answers. And if you only kind of attended to the sort of the logic that they pursue in their power analysis, and she is clearly someone who's very interested in, she had a big hit with a play called Chimerica about Chinese Communist Party.
You can watch that on 4OD. I think they multi-parted it as a TV series as well. I hadn't actually seen that of hers.
Yeah,
I saw NFSW at the Royal Court like a couple of years ago, which is one of her other big hits. But I didn't notice that last line, and again that is very telling. That's interesting. So I want Simon. I want to hear more about your detailed research into kind of interviews with Lucy. What was your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's as I said, she's born in 1984. It turns she's often described in biographies as an East London girl, but I mean, she's an East London girl who went to a very posh grammar in Essex, selective grammar school, and she's got that kind of thing you find, where people are trying to sort of downplay their privilege. I suppose they would see it as. And a lot of the interviews you see where she's kind of, she admits to she says she's to the left of Keir Starmer. She voted Remain. She said something very interesting about being English. And I'm just trying to find what it was, but it was essentially that she was saying, I think she said something like, I always think that my instinct is to look beyond England. I always think of myself as kind of English. She says, I seem to be drawn...
global citizen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. She says, I seem to be drawn to writing English plays coming out of foreign mouths, and that's quite dangerous. So she sort of both plays on this thing of being an East London girl, but she's kind of not what you think of as an East London girl. I think she's come from her father was a city investment analyst, so she kind of, she
he's a pearly king. He's he's practically a Cockney market stall trader. 2 for £1.
That's it. Have a banana, which of course was a recurring joke in the play, wasn't it? The use of the word banana. And it said there was this thing here. We go, Kirkwood swapped the East End for life in rural Norfolk. And I always think when people say swapped the East End, it's almost as if they're doing a sort of making a transaction in which they're somehow losing out in some way. But, they're sort of gaining...
ran away from third world London, basically.
Yeah. And she talks about, I felt quite insulated in Shoreditch. I mixed with people like me, went to work with people like me, lived with people like me. If you walk down Brick Lane, it's full of cunts like me. I can't even believe she said the word cunts. Everyone's an artist. It's all very ephemeral. You're living in this world based on nonsense. Everyone's got loads of money. Everyone's living a lovely life and is not quite aware of the fact that they are living a lovely life. In Norfolk, there are lots of people that don't give a toss about the arts. I really like that. So there's always this kind of downplaying of your background that I think afflicts the middle class sort of theatre writer. They often are very reluctant.
That is something, a very artistic tendency, isn't it? To try and feel unique, and part of that is like, I'm not like the other. I'm just not a Shoreditch writer,
Yeah.
I'm actually like a Norfolk writer. I actually like speak to working class people. I just like listen to just understand the like views of like the common people,
Yeah.
And part of like that move is a classic trying to again create a unique identity for themselves. But
yes.
Was there any interviews related to this? Because I wondered if she'd done much press at all around the actual play.
This was the interesting thing. They tried this kind of PR strategy. I don't know if you've gone onto the Royal Court website and had a look.
No.
But they filmed a series of short videos, which were like interviews with the actors in rehearsal, interview with the director in rehearsal. And they very much play the videos as little performances in themselves, where they're playing along with this idea that they've got this secret play that they're going to unleash. And, should we be talking about this, in case the government's listening? And they even contrive to sort of talk to the camera about this sort of, red hot play. And then there's little cutaways where the camera's sort of spying on them as if they're whispering secretively about, is this too dangerous? And, oh shit, I've still got a mic on me. And, pretend hot mic moments as if they're kind of terror
cringe. I can feel the cringe from here.
Very enough. And go and have a look at it. But it's kind of this thing of, we're telling you the truth, and then they're sort of being caught out by sort of surreptitious filming, so they're trying to sort of, really lather it on thick, with this kind of, we're playing with several different narratives over the top of this actual play. But I think there's definitely a thing that she is speaking to certain. She says, there was something I picked up in an interview. She said, what we're sort of battling is individualism, because you simply cannot deal with a lot of the things that we're going to have to be dealing with in the next 50 to 100 years if you think about yourself as an individual. If countries think about themselves as individual countries, they're going to be global issues.
But climate change, this is very WEFy. This is interesting because there was a WEF reference I forgot to mention, where they where Noah talked about owning nothing and be happy. It was literally the line straight out of that. So very interesting that got picked up. But,
and she's very kind of iffy on like borders. I haven't got the actual quote where it was I found, but she was sort of talking about borders being very unhelpful. So you get a lot of this sense, as I say, of the kind of the liberal English elite sort of self-despising, sort of downplaying their quote privilege, downplaying their sort of nativity, so to speak, and trying to sort of sell a kind of if we can only just all sort of play together quietly, we'll sort all of this out by collective action. But really, I mean, it kind of means people like us will sort it out for you. This is the interesting thing, because again, like you said, it's a warning against social media polarization. It's a warning against susceptible minds approaching media. And again, it's interesting because I feel like some of the conclusions that she's come to from a purely left perspective is also reflected on the right. And again, I very much agree about, AA talks about Bernays and the kind of the sheep-like masses, the susceptible people, and the power that media has. And it's like, that's something that we both agree on. But I think that the problem is, like you said, what's her solution to that? It's like, what was it, collectivization? It's like coming together as a group of workers and doctors and
you know. But how do you defeat like raw power, or how do you stop these individuals? And again, what ends up happening is this is almost like a foundation myth or a lie they tell themselves, because in the end they will still be using guns to get what they want, or they'll be exerting power to achieve their goals by the end of it. It's kind of this way again. It's kind of interesting because it kind of gets a little bit fashy as as well, where again it's like, oh, you need to actually subserve to the state, and the state, it needs to be better than you. And actually, it's like it's again, it's our current leaders that are the problem. It's the current form of democracy that we have. And actually, if we had this, this one great leader, I was like, oh, okay, interesting. That's
yeah. But it's very selective, isn't it? She wrote a bit about Trump in a previous play. I think it was a play called The Children. And she sort of dealt with Trump and Brexit. I think they probably just said, disparaging things in the play, the characters about Trump and Brexit.
Orange man applause in the royal court.
Yeah, exactly. She said something about Trump's demonization of the media. She said that starts with you shutting off people's access to or trust in a set of voices that offer counter narratives to the set of views you present, i.e. she's saying that people like Trump were shutting off access to trusted voices. The kind of, it's the experts of
exactly. But how do you stop Trump? How do you stop social media? How do you stop these quote unquote dangerous websites? And the only answer is by force. That's what they basically mean. So again, it's kind of like this in some ways is a critique of an authoritarian society that we live in, a technocracy, a prison of our own making, caused by these dangerous capitalist overlords. But again, it's like, how do you stop it? Well, you're stopping these social media by either inspiring people to do it, and I guarantee after that doesn't work, the next thing to do is to force people to do it, because this is the classic leftist progression. We start off by ideas of choice, and then through propaganda, and then through force. It was the way. It is always the way. It's just straight out of the Soviet Union. But why I like the play, and where I think it has interesting points, is that Noah is, as a character, he is like an unfiltered based character. He says the unsayable. Yes, he has cringe views on climate change. Like he is a person that doesn't exist, because I'm maybe with Russell Brand or whatever. Like he's like anti-UF but pro climate change or whatever. So maybe there is the rise of these kind of like dualist figures. But he's saying stuff that is exceedingly heretical in what I consider to be a wholly leftist place.
Yes.
And again, it's like you're saying, I feel like she's coming to terms with what's happening. There is an unstoppable mass of people that are waking up to serious issues with society and the world and the elites. And she hasn't got any solutions. That's their problem. Her solution is, let's get together and collectivize and stop being so individual. But
yes,
you're up against a steamroller, love. You're about to get absolutely flattened. So, but so that's why I think it's interesting, and it's very, very timely. And the play itself, I think, is relatively well executed. It has those cheesy moments. It has these kind of twists and turns, but it's an interesting and sometimes amusing look at meta commentary and different narrative layers. It's almost like postmodern with the
the subject area is interesting, and as you say, it surfaces some sort of interesting questions, doesn't it? And it kind of because of where she's coming from, I think it retreats from the complexities of answering those questions, of addressing those harder truths. And part of that has been wrought by the left's own social project to kind of collapse distinctions and hierarchies. And it's failed to ignore so much about power. It's succeeded in ignoring so much about power. It's failed by doing that. it's kind of diverted all of its critiques into sort of very misidentified culprits, but they're often sort of abstract and collectivized culprits. It's like, well, it's the patriarchy.
Yes, it's a lot of this. They keep talking about kind of cultural war stuff, isn't it? That's what I find. It's kind of like nothing power related. All of these kind of like little incidents or like
it's not particularist.
baubles.
It's very broad brush. It's like and as you say, she sort of has this critique in the play, which well, is democracy the problem? So that's a very nebulous thing to kind of you can sort of see on the one hand, you can see on the one hand the interesting appeal of the question. At the same time, it's kind of typical of the left to kind of always neutralize the subservient classes by creating something abstract, like the war on terror. Exactly, patriarchy, sexism, racism, all of that stuff, and then that's what kind of leads to that paralysis that she's kind of sort of bemoaning and wanting people to emerge from by, as you say, this kind of spontaneous action of just all kind of, we all turn up in Trafalgar Square and we overthrow the power man. It's kind of like this hippie Marxist. You know how like Marx himself just believed that all of these spontaneous revolutions would come out from the West. Yeah,
it's exactly that same viewpoint. The other thing I think that why it's an important play is that it's kind of like an attack on the left itself. It's an attack on the middle class white women's scolds. It's an attack on woke, basically. At the same time, it's trying to kind of articulate this Tony Blair defense. But again, I feel like, what is your real defense against? This is me speaking to Lucy now. Lucy, if you have had the pleasure of listening to 2.5 hours of Simon and mine dulcet tones,
we've actually gone on longer than the play, but that's good.
Analyzing your entertaining but misguided play, you are asking the right questions, but you're coming up with the wrong answers. Just FYI, that's but what she's articulated is there is a problem where people like her are being pushed out of traditional leftist circles. If I wonder if she's a bit turfy as well. That's the kind of impression I get. Because she's done the play about menstruation and stuff like that beforehand. Very third wave feminist.
She has, she's a writer in residence for a feminist theatre company, isn't she? And it was a feminist theatre company that originally started off working with women in prisons, I believe. So she's very much got this carrying grievance for abused women, as abused by the system, abused by the patriarchy, and these are themes that I think have happened, throughout her plays. She did a play about women working in the porn industry, being terribly abused, and women being oppressed back in the sort of 18th century. Play called The Welkin, I think it was. So it's often the kind of the usual culprits, responsible for holding her back. As she has another play on Broadway, The Royal Court.
Well, exactly. I mean, there was an irony to her literally pushing out another like male writer, white male working class voice from The Royal Court, and replacing itself with just another middle class whinging white woman. But anyway, I guess my point is that she has these basically relatively traditional now views on women and womanhood. And she's finding herself increasingly ostracized from the left. And again, she's on Mumsnet complaining about stuff. Again, that reference to reading the Guardian and the Daily Mail, I'm sure that's her, or like chatting on Mumsnet and complaining about stuff. And she feels like she's not part of a tribe anymore, because the people that she's speaking to are these totally and utterly insane leftists who okay, well, I don't even have to mention the kind of views they have. But how do you deal with that? Again, like her answer is, if we just stick together, guys, we're going to defeat this. But the mind virus is already out there, and it's taken over her politics, and it's going to push more and more people like her out. But I just want to say that we don't want you, Lucy. The right doesn't want you. You can just stay in Norfolk.
Yeah,
Stay
yeah.
there, please.
In your Georgian workman's cottage with lovely wooden beams and stuff, which apparently looks very nice.
Just fade away, fade away. That's
Yeah,
all.
yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, I feel very similar. That she kind of, I think it's that leaving the solution space to things which very much privilege, a certain class of people within the left. And she says in another quote here, right now, I think the most radical state you can be in is to say, I don't know. People being so certain about everything, that's what I find frightening. Again, to me, that's that thing about, well, that's the failure of the left she's talking about again. There's no moral underpinning to the direction that the left is heading in, because it's all become completely relativized. It's all become completely plastic. It's kind of, it's febrile with its own sort of, sense of, righteousness, and yet it's distracted by consumerism in exactly the same way everybody else is, and that means it can't really mobilize its people to all, turn up and overthrow the system anymore. So it's frightened in its own way.
Well, that's it. In some ways, she's like an old school Marxist, raging against mass global corporations.
Yeah.
But the foot soldiers of those same places are the same people, celebrating Pride Month and all that kind of thing. So again,
Yes,
her people have been consumed in some way by the beast.
yeah.
And again, like you said, she has no answers. So why should I listen to you if you have no answers? You have someone who says that is like a no-hoper. They have no confidence. They have no ways forward. So.
Yeah, it's kind of a lot of the investment they've put into institutions, the left, like the NHS, the education system. It reminds me of a clip from one of the Adam Curtis films. It might have been Century of the Self or The Trap or something. There was a Labour strategist called Philip Gould back in the sort of Tony Blair years when they were reforming the party into New Labour. And I remember he was talking about, he was at he was kind of at a dinner party with some Labour grandees, and he said, this high up Labour guy, his wife was talking to me and saying, it's awful. The people, we provide all these things for them, when we educate them, we give them public sector jobs, and all they want to do is read The Sun, and they don't want to vote for us. So it's the sort of the sense of ingratitude they're feeling.
Yeah, that's interesting as well, because again, I think this is a disenchantment with the working class as well. Because again, this is what the working class has evolved into, these kind of consumerist loons. As that's what I feel like, putting castor oil on themselves, doing these kind of fake remedies, and watching Inception and Love Island and all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of like in one ways, she's been pushed out of her people and her group, and then the people that she's meant to be paternalizing are increased. Like, I think she's just become totally disenchanted with them and what they stand for at the same time. And in some ways, I feel like the ending is kind of like maybe a projection of herself. It would be better if someone comes in and just kills them. That's and that's again, I think the classic tanky bleeding through there. The kind of Stalin's democracy with a gun, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, so, Simon, any kind of last comments? Any kind of last things you desperately wanted to say about the play?
No, particularly. No, I think we've really quite kind of squeezed the bastard out, really, haven't we? I mean, it's interesting. I was looking, some of the reviews came out last night, and I have to say most of them are largely not complimentary. They feel it was kind of the only one review which was gushing was, of course, The Guardian. But The Telegraph, I think, and The Standard and the others all kind of went, no, it's got no kind of tension to it. It's got no kind of, hook, to sort of, bring you along. But as you say, I think there are valuable themes in the play, but they're kind of submerged by a sort of leftist analysis that very much doesn't want to deal with the real issues. It wants to kind of, as I say, sort of submerge them in a paternalist kind of sort of lamentation. At the same time, as you say, there are things that are coming out that are quite based, but you can't let those things be sort of spoken of. You can't talk about those things and how they sort of factor into people's aspirations. You know, you've got to kind of keep them thinking that you know, a kind of a magical moment's going to happen. We're all just going to hold hands, sing Kumbaya, and the world's going to get better.
Yeah. Well, like I said before, it's her asking the right questions about what's wrong with society, what's wrong with these people, etc. But then
she can't possibly answer them, though.
Well, exactly.
She,
as she says, she has no answers.
Yeah.
But I have an answer. I have an answer, but I'm not gonna say it on the stream right now. So.
Oh, there was one funny quote actually. This is one thing I've got to realize. To end on a lighter note, she was talking about working with actors, and she said, "Getting stuck during the composition of a play resembles," and this is her quote, "trying to put on a wet swimming costume. It just won't go with you. Seeing actors working on scripts in rehearsal, quote, is like opening your fridge and finding a Parmesan rind, and then someone makes you a risotto out of it." You know, it's the sort of thing that theatre people say. It reminded me of Nigel Planer did a book called I, an Actor, which is a kind of parody of all those sort of self-aggrandizing actor biographies by people like Simon Callow and Anthony Sher, which I actually love. They're brilliant books. But he has like a quote on the back, which is kind of one of these kind of self-aggrandizing actor quotes, which reminded me of what she said. It's like, acting is the supreme test of physical and mental courage. It's like climbing Everest single-handed in the dark. It's like painting the Sistine Chapel with a shark strapped to your back. It's like being asleep on a helter-skelter with no pajamas and a hangover. You know, they always sort of compare it to some sort of endurance feat, you know. And I thought her comment about, you know, you find a Parmesan rind and then somebody makes you risotto.
That is the worst. Literally the worst.
Yeah.
Lucy, you need to sort your life out, love. Literally. Get a better analogy. Look, how long have you been in Norfolk for? You know, that's not the standard fare of the Norfolk working class.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. Well, like I said, I think interesting themes, very timely. I'd recommend it. I'm gonna give it a 4 stars out of 5. I don't care how, like Simon will hate me for it, but I thought just ignore the rubbish.
Yeah.
Just think about Noah. And then everything works out.
2 out of 5. I'll give it.
Oh, it's just damning. I can tell you, it's the best thing that's out there right now. I'm 100% sure.
Blimey.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
Jasper,
again, it does say the state of the current plays, basically.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. I respect, you know, the ethics of people who put on the work. You know, they technically accomplish the play, the actors, the directors, they do all the stuff. And you can respect the fact, and it gives you something to discuss. And I think that's what's interesting. Even seeing a play I didn't particularly like as a play has brought out a really interesting conversation. So, I mean, thank you for that.
No worries at all. Now, one recommendation for people who are getting into plays, buy the play text, because it gives you a chance to kind of reread stuff. Or if there's no chance of you seeing the play, if you're in another country, you can buy the play text from the Royal Court. It's about £10, I think. And well worth the cost, especially for any. I'm hoping there's a budding playwright out there waiting to create based plays. We're waiting for you to launch. So please do that. Simon, anything to shill at all before we finish up?
No, not particularly. But I'm going to be on a Proper Horror Shows channel, I think, at the end of the month. I'm going to be talking about the horror film from John Carpenter, In the Mouth of Madness. I'm going to be doing a bit of a breakdown of that.
Simon will be telling us about some research he did on the T-Boy for the set, where it's an interesting fact that he actually knew the grandmother of the T-Boy.
I shall drop some more names. I don't have any names to drop in that one, actually, which is a shame. But yeah, it's quite an interesting film. And it does actually overlap with some of that stuff we were talking about the kind of moral majority panic back in the sort of late 70s and early 80s that was going on in America.
Okay,
so
interesting.
Elements of crossover. Yeah.
Very cool. If you like your horror, please tune into that. For those who don't know, I've recently launched my Foundations of Entrepreneurship course on Academic Agency's channel. If you're interested in business, obviously totally unrelated to theatre, maybe you're starting your own theatre company and you want to know how to launch it correctly, then buy my course. And if you want to support the channel, please like, subscribe, and comment. Something a little bit different. Now, Simon, huge news just in. Before we started, I mentioned about something that came on my radar. Harry Hill doing a new play about the life of a personal hero of mine, Tony Blair.
Yes.
AA has confirmed that he's down for going. So again, I will be
Fantastic.
organising a group visit. We'll see if we can get like some group discounts. So if you want to pop down to London for the day to watch a rock opera on the life of Anthony, then
Charles Linton Blair.
Please contact me on Twitter, and we'll organise a posse of people to come down. And if not, we will be doing a review on The Deepest Law sometime.
Yeah.
But with that, thank you so much for listening, and good night.